Good evening. Welcome to the Finance Commission. Today is March 2nd, and we will be reviewing budgets for 2021. We are handicapped access to the building is off of Central Street, and access is at the back door. Thank you. I'd like to begin this meeting tonight with the school department. And why don't you introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Dave Thompson. I'm the superintendent.
Karen Jarrett, Director of Finance.
Lori Semino, Director of Student Services. Teresa Stewart, School Committee Chair.
Thank you.
And yes, thank you for having us. I think I'm going to get started and then hand it over to Dr. Thompson.
There you go.
So if we could go to the next slide that has the overview. There are a number of different layers to the school budget that we wanted to discuss with all of you tonight, both with the current FY20 and also looking to FY21. So as we go throughout the presentation tonight, if you have questions on something we say, clarifying questions, please ask us. But we do ask like larger questions wait until the end, because we do hope that we actually answer most of your questions throughout the presentation. And the four of us have different pieces that we're going to share with you this evening according to our expertise. But there's multiple layers that we need to talk with you tonight. The first, we're going to look a little bit more at the mandated positions for ELL and special education that we added to the FY20 budget after town meeting in May. The second piece we're going to look through is our English language learner mandates, both for the current budget and projected for FY21. Special education mandates. We're also going to talk to you in detail about our out-of-district tuitions, special education, circuit breaker, move-in situations. We are going to take you through each of these topics individually and comprehensively. And we just ask that as we go through all of them, that you keep in mind that every statistic, every number you hear represents something so much larger because it represents a child, a student in our schools. So with that, Dr. Thompson?
Yep. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Too far. There we go. All right. So we wanted to try to get to a point where we could compare budgets, get down to an operating budget, so we'd be able to look at, kind of apples to apples. So what we did, we started with the FY20 budget without the free cash that was returned to the town as promised, without the capital outlay appropriations. That was a $49 million budget. But when we take out of district costs out of that, it drops to $45,766,114.
So that's 3.4 million in out-of-district sped costs for
Right.
this fiscal year.
This year, yeah.
This
And
year.
we're going to start with the baseline budget, taking out of district.
Take it out. So we're really looking at the core of the budget.
But right now, you don't know what the circuit breaker is going to be, so
We will
to
get
offset
circuit
that.
breaker.
Okay.
We will. We'll get
Yes.
there. Yep. But we kind of wanted to strip the budget down and have a, to the bottom
Okay,
layer
good.
to see.
We
Could we
like
go to the
that.
next slide, please? All right, so looking at our preliminary budget without out-of-district tuitions, without any staff additions, it would be $47,367,927.90. Should round up, but that's okay. And comparing that to that baseline, as I just described, that would be a 3.5% increase. So apples to apples, if we take those drivers out of the equation, it's a 3.5% increase. Next slide, please. However, we have some budget drivers. The first we're going to talk about is our English language learner population. So our October 1 number of EL students in the district was 340. This past October, we had 436 EL students. A majority of them were level 1 non-speakers, demanding more intense servicing. So that's a 28% increase. Today, actually we have to pull March 1st numbers tomorrow, but we expect that number tomorrow to be 446 EL students. So that's a 31% increase since we started budgeting and talking about the FY21 budget. That is a significant driver.
How does this compare to the overall increase in student population? Are all of them English language learners? Or has there been additional, like how many people have we gained in the district? It says we've gained 10 since school started, right?
Right.
That are English language learners. How many have we gained in total in the overall student population? Do we know
Probably,
that?
EL is probably about a third
Okay.
of that.
Okay.
of that.
But between the June of 19 and September of 2019, how many students did you gain in the district?
I want to say 90.
Okay, so
New
looking,
to the public
New
school.
to the, right, they came.
From out of
right,
town.
They came from out of town, out of the country, mostly over the
And how
summer.
many was that again?
About 90.
all right,
That's
so,
basically every student was an English language learner.
But that's not the
No,
net.
no, that's not the total number that came in, that's the EL number that came in.
When-
You asked me the
But that's
total?
not the net after taking who's left and who came in and what.
That's an increase of approximately 90 EL students.
all right,
ELL,
but in
okay.
terms of total increase, you know, total number of students increased this year versus last year, approximately how many was that?
I'd have to go back and look, I don't have that number with me today, but we're up, we were at 4,400, we're over 4,500 now, so we've seen a general increase as well.
Okay,
4,400 in, at the end of last,
3,000.
3,000, I'm sorry, 3,000.
okay.
so you were at
Yeah.
3,
Yeah,
So
sorry.
that's the net new people and the people who have left. That's the net.
That's the net, yeah.
So again, the difference is how many?
it's only 100.
We said we gained 100.
Right.
You gained
From-
100 new,
ELs, right.
no, I'm not talking EL, I'm talking about net student.
Well, I would have to go back and look, I don't have that number with me off the top of my head right now.
Maya,
This,
hold
this
on.
number is not just one school year though, this is over
This
a
is
fiscal-
multiple.
a calendar year.
Yeah.
This school year, the latest enrollment report I have is from the beginning of February, so there's probably an update coming in our,
Right,
in
there
our
is,
school
we're
committee
working on it
packets.
today.
There were 30 new elementary, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
30 elementary students, just this school year, so from September
September to
until
now.
February,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
30 new elementary students. It looks like there was some movement in the middle school, and we're actually down 14 in that timeframe.
Is it 16?
14.
No, but that's 16 total.
Oh, yes, I'm
Right.
sorry,
Yeah.
yes,
Minus
yes,
And minus
14.
it's a positive of 8 district-wide.
yes. Because there was
So,
minus 8.
so if I'm ascertaining this data correctly, we actually are pretty stable at students. But in the attrition we're gaining more
It's the
English
mix.
Yes.
English language
Yes.
learners
Yes.
and losing traditional
Yes,
students.
the
Yes.
number.
So are the population of students with needs is going up?
Our high
Well,
need,
yeah,
absolutely.
got
Our
it,
high
okay.
need population is definitely going up.
Excuse me, I'm going to recognize Maya, who is on the Budget Balancing Subcommittee.
Just one more data point to add to this. Teresa's absolutely right on the ones who have come in this school year. But if you look at October 1, 2018 to October 1, 2019, the overall school population was up by about 2%. So
Okay.
of the roughly 3,500.
To 70
so,
kids.
Yeah, about 70 kids up.
But the student mix is what makes this all different because of the needs.
Right.
Yes.
Right, right. So you can't look at just the number of students, it's the need of the students in our school.
And
Composition.
I'm gonna step in here and remember that in 2018, I was at one of your school committee meetings, and I believe that you had several of your teachers there, and they were telling us the difference of, there were some added mandates that you had to go through, and to keep a child in a review situation for a little longer.
Yep,
Okay, so I just want people to know that there's
Right.
this progression that the children have to meet, and that
Right.
they're watched, and so that makes a significant difference to how you
right.
process
Right,
everything.
so a non-English speaker has to get 4 hours of instruction outside of the regular classroom a day.
A day?
Yeah,
For ELL.
for ELL,
And no, not including integrated class time.
right,
So that's substantially separated time.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, now,
Until they reach a point,
Right.
And they get
level
to 2.
3, and then they
Oh,
get,
it's
then they
3,
move
okay.
in,
Well, there's 6 levels total.
right.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
whole tiered system and they're constantly evaluated.
Okay.
So as they're evaluated through this system, it's a prescribed amount of time. So every child goes through that system at a different speed.
Depending on what their baseline is, right?
Right.
Correct.
So wouldn't it, just off the cuff, wouldn't it make sense to invest more money up front on the level 1 students so we progress them faster?
Well,
And we have less
it's
spend later in their
Well, it's a factor of how quickly those students are
Assimilated.
accumulating the language,
Okay.
right?
Right.
Because they don't always come in a nice, clean package, ready to go, right?
fair.
Oftentimes, they have multiple other areas of need.
Absolutely.
So, we're taking them at their speed,
Okay.
right? So, and investing in them is really an EL teacher, right, English language teacher, so it's just making sure that we have the right resources available to meet them where they're at,
Got it.
to take them at the speed at which they're available to take in the language and what it is that we're teaching.
And what's the correlation between ELL and other services? Is there a direct correlation between those two things?
Meaning
or-
like in special education?
Yes.
It's a pretty high correlation.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
All right,
Jude,
just,
whoops, go ahead.
I'm just gonna ask, in terms of the new students between 18 and 19, are those primarily elementary, or are they spread across?
Go to the next slide.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, you can see where we added.
Okay.
So
Right.
after town meeting last year,
Right.
most of these, I think all these were in the fall.
Yeah.
The school committee, we took notes, so
Okay.
we added 2.5 ELL teachers across the district. You can see that one full-time was at the Bulge, 0.5
Yep.
at Oldham, 0.5 at Willett, but then also 0.5
Right,
at
right.
the Coakley.
At
So
the
it's not
Coakley.
just elementary
Right.
that we're seeing this need come in.
Right, so what we've seen is them come in younger and they are aging up. Our smallest numbers are still at the high school, but that's going to change pretty soon.
Out of these schools that are listed here, which one of them has the highest number or percentage of English language students?
The Bulge.
Okay. Any estimate as to how many as a total are in the
It's a,
program?
it's a, almost, it's a little more than a third of the
Third.
population.
So,
Judy,
so from the
what-
data, you added 96 position, there were 96 students added, but you only added 96 positions, that would be great.
No, we
Right.
Everyone would have their own teacher, that would be fantastic.
Quickly repeat that we did not add 96.
Yes, sorry. No.
Okay.
You had 96 English language learners, but you only added 2.5 teachers, so if you do the math out, that's like 42 kids a class. That doesn't, like, how does that correlate to
Well-
regular class
Well, it
sizes?
depends, because you have some at the higher end of the tier, so they're monitored, you have some that are being
Okay,
pushed
so
in.
they require less services.
They,
Okay, got it.
they require less services, so that as they move up and gain more English proficiency.
Got it, got it.
Oops, I'm gonna
Judy.
sneak in here. You said 4 extra hours for each student? in
Well, it's
the
4
year.
hours out of the day.
Out of the
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
that doesn't increase their their
No. No.
So they're not getting some other learning because
Right,
it has
well,
to
what
be
they try
replaced by
to,
that.
what they do is they take the curriculum and teach it in a separate situation, separate classroom,
Thank you.
and adapt it.
Go ahead.
Yep. So we had to add 2.5 EL teachers. So a lot of these part-time positions, I believe 2 of them were increasing people that we had, because we did anticipate, and there was a position and a half that was one of, that was in the override ask. So if you think at it, it's actually 4 teachers that were added from last year to this year, because we added 1.5 in the override and then 2.5. So this was additional above and beyond what we anticipated arriving. So, next
Are
slide.
there any after-school programs? I know Title I does voluntary before-school programming for reading. Is there any ELL programs that are done before or after school?
No. Not at this
I know
point.
you can't mandate them, I
Right.
understand that.
Well, we'd have to fund them somehow too.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
How many languages do we have in the entire system and in particular the Bulge?
46, I think.
There's a lot, I would.
I know there's
Yeah.
a lot. I know at one time it was 28.
Yeah, we just started to talk about diving into the data a little deeper. Carolyn Robbins at the Willett just put on like a cultural night, and she had some statistics at the Willett, and then Dave and I were just talking about looking into that district-wide. We have not yet had the chance to break that down, but we
Right.
can get back to you on it.
But it's
Okay.
it's in the 30s, I believe. Okay, so,
Yeah, so looking forward now, so beyond that apples to apples baseline, now we're starting to share with you a little bit more the next layer of what really is mandated to get into the budget.
right.
So looking forward into FY '21, additional required by law,
Mhm.
mandated ELL positions. There's a 0.6 FTE for ELL teacher that is in our budget, well, not in that baseline, but in the mandated column. An ELL curriculum coordinator, which Dr. Thompson can talk more in a moment about why that is so needed. And this represents $71,835.
Right.
Do you want to talk more about the ELL?
Yeah, so when you get above 350, you are supposed to have someone coordinating the EL program. So we are definitely at that point. The plan is to have a part-time teacher and someone doing, 0.4 in a coordinator lead type position. So that's what that one position is. And that represents 0.16% out of our total baseline in FY20. But that is a mandated position. I don't know if the 0.6 teaching will actually, if the last 2 years comes, stays, as it has been the last 2 years. I don't know if 0.6 will be enough. But again, a budget is a snapshot of where you are and what you need at this point in time. And that's what we're anticipating at this point.
Do we know what percentage of our ELL costs are actually reimbursed by the state?
There's a Title III grant. Do you have, how much did we get in Title III last year? So Title III is a federal grant. It does not cover everything. You cannot pay for teachers out of that. Yes. That
$55,000.
$55,000.
Be right here.
Okay, thank you.
It's not reimbursed by teachers.
What
Right.
do you
Okay,
pay
so
for?
Right,
You
it's
pay
not-
Be
for it.
separate, and it's mandated, but falls on the towns to
Well,
actually distribute,
right.
to actually fund it.
Right. So what we have,
That's pretty funny.
well, that's our federal government at work. So they mandate, so we have mandated services we have to provide, and there's very little funding coming to us to provide it. What we use the $55 for, mostly materials, some training, a little bit. Most of it, we have hired part-time para-type tutors to come in, less than half-time FTE, so we're not paying benefits. And they come in and we pay them out of that Title III. But my understanding is that they are, because we are always changing the rules of the grants, that might not be possible
So
next
just to
year.
reiterate, because I think this is important for the audience at home to understand, that this is mandated and the town only recoups $55,000 of all the costs of probably, I think it's 28% of our population uses these services. We only recoup $55,000 from grants. I think it's really important that people understand that. Because it's completely different than special education, which I know a lot of people know a lot about, but I think it's
Yeah.
very important that everybody understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why we separated out the EL layer from the special
That was good.
education, because it is an entirely
Okay.
different ballgame. So
right,
we did
thank you.
want to share with you more about the special education mandates and the positions that school committee voted to approve and add in after town meeting. So we have added an additional 4 paraprofessionals, and Lori can tell you a little bit more about why those were needed.
Sure, so, one was a requirement for a move-in, we'll talk a lot about move-ins, but one came, with a student who moved into town, was already within the child's IEP. We are required to mirror the IEPs for students when they move in town. Another was, an increased medical need, that we are actually able to mirror because of the need of that, along with an increased need in our ACE coverage. So ACE is our academic support block. We had an increase there. We were able to mirror those two needs together to be covered by one position. We had an increase in students moving in over the summer who would be attending the LEAP program at the Bulge. So we had to increase in order to meet our ratios at the LEAP program. And again, we opened the PACS program. One of the positions in the budget had been allocated for the PACS program at the high school due to numbers that had come in for the preschool out of the LMPA. That FTE was actually allocated to the preschool, and in order to open that classroom, we needed to add a paraprofessional to that as well.
I guess my question is that these are FY20 positions added after town meeting. I'm still a little bit at a loss to understand, because we went through the process of getting an override, which was supposed to include, most anticipated positions and responsibilities for FY20. So we added 4 after town meeting.
So Lori just mentioned that one of them was a move-in.
Two of them.
Two of
Two of
them.
them were move-ins. Can't really predict move-ins. We don't have any crystal
Yeah.
ball to help us understand
Sometimes you get move-outs too, but I
That
guess
is
we,
true.
I guess,
That
but I
is
guess we
true.
get a plus,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I wish we were telling you a little bit of a different different
Oh,
story
well,
tonight,
you
but
know,
we're not.
like-
But two
Yeah.
are move-ins,
Yeah.
one at the LMPA, so that's our preschool. So I think what's important to keep in mind about the preschool is just the system of the preschool. So children often come to us because they age out of early intervention. And we don't know, we're not notified by EI until they're 2.9 that they're coming. So we have a little bit of notice. But I couldn't tell you today who's gonna be in our preschool for sure in the fall.
Okay.
Because they're just not on EI's radar to tell the school system quite yet.
And I
Okay.
can tell you anecdotally, just over February vacation, from the time we left on Friday to the time we came back the following Monday after vacation, we got 8 referrals that we were not expecting.
Referrals for the
For to be
Mustangs?
coming into LNPA.
Right, and this
From,
is,
from outside or from
Early
within?
intervention.
New move-ins
Nope.
No.
Early intervention that we were not anticipating.
that were already students here.
No, so
No.
early intervention is your birth to 3 program. So for a variety of reasons, based on birth or soon after prenatally, a family gets early intervention. By the time you're 3, you can no longer be in early intervention. So around 2.9 is when they do an assessment and they determine if they think that this child is still gonna need services after their 3rd birthday. And if so, it's mandated that they go
So
to
this
your
is
public
increased
preschool,
services for existing child.
but not in our school system.
They're a resident of Norwood.
They're residents of
Right, they're
Norwood, but they're
resident of
in
Norwood.
early intervention. Early intervention is not under the Department of Education, it's under the Department of Health and Human Services.
And it's not, we have no control over it.
right.
Enable runs it.
And, you know, and the other piece of the preschool is that they roll in. They don't all start in September. So if you age into as a 3-year-old, so you turn 3 in March, you would need services. You would come to the preschool starting in March. So it's a rolling enrollment.
And just as a reminder, we're mandated to have the preschool, and if we did not have this preschool system, then the district would be responsible for the cost of that child to send them elsewhere for the preschool.
In
Well,
a,
plus you recoup costs because you have,
We have the peer model.
you have the peer model where
Yeah,
students
for the-
actually come, yeah.
For the
so-
children who are special education,
Right.
we don't have, you can't say no.
But I'm saying like, why would
But
we
at
wanna
least
do
we
that?
have-
We could recoup revenue to cover some of those costs. Why would we
Right.
wanna do that? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we also.
We would lose that revenue.
just by way of comparison, when we're talking about 8 new referrals, how does that compare with past years? Is that different? Is that an
Yes,
increase
this
from
year-
last year's or?
We have hit an all-time high this year in referrals to the LNPA. Yes, I was actually just speaking with the principal and team chair just this past week, and they were telling me that this year, at this point in approaching March, we have hit the all-time high in Norwood.
And this is something that we've asked Lori as a school committee, and just personally in conversations I've had with Lori, this is a
So
lot of
who-
professionally what I do in my background, but I think it's helpful to understand that the kids who are coming to us, there's an increase in autistic needs, and there's also an increase in children in the state, not just Norwood, who have what is called global delays. So that is your kids who have speech, OT, PT needs. Those are the children, so not only are we seeing a higher number, but a higher level of need in our preschool.
So who determines whether they need additional services or go into these programs? Who?
So we do.
You
There's
do.
an evaluation, an
And what
extensive,
guidelines do you use?
there's an extensive evaluation process. So we use norm reference standardized testing. All students go through the process. We do the testing. There's a team process that's set out by the state. It's very regulated, laws and regulations that guide what we do. And we determine whether or not they're eligible for special education based on the state guidelines.
So is this a program similar audited by the outside to make sure that we're doing the right thing?
We're going through an audit right now.
Okay, and they're auditing you and?
They audit the district.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with me.
Well, you kept saying that, you know, we do this and we do that.
They're going to your house and they're auditing you.
I own my department. I mean, I own my.
So there is some kind of an official audit going on
Yes.
to verify that
Goes on
we're
it.
doing the right thing
Yeah.
at the right time.
Yeah, goes on every 6 years, well, every 3 years and then it's a 6-year cycle, but then they do a mid-year every 3 years.
And it happens in every town.
Yes,
Yes.
Awesome.
yep,
Okay.
And where does the results go?
they're public. It gets posted online.
I've never seen any
Oh,
results
yeah.
or
They're
anything.
on Norwood Public Schools website.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's very public.
Yep.
I'm busy looking at the coronavirus.
And we do, so.
Okay, let's get back to what we're doing here.
So that is not in our budget. But going back to special education mandates. Laura can share more with you as well about what we're now looking to
Sure.
in fiscal year 21.
So moving ahead, so we continue to look at the in-district programs. Obviously, our goal is to always look at the least restrictive environment to keep as many students in Norwood as we possibly can. So we're looking at increasing the LEAP program, which is at the Balch. This is a program that was started 3-4 years ago at the Balch. It is service students grades 1 through 3. We now have students who are aging up to grade 4. So we actually need to start the second tier of that program, like the rest of our programs at the elementary level. We're only allowed to have students who are 48 months apart by regulation, age-wise. And so like our other elementary programs, there's typically a 1 to 3, 3 to 5, depending on the makeup of students. We're at the point where we need to now expand that program because of the number of students in it and their birth dates. So we will be moving on to the second tier of that program.
Is there space issues in terms of in the buildings?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That's another conversation
That's
another
a whole
day.
nother.
Let's stay with budget
It's a
today,
whole nother ball of wax.
They threw it all at me year
Right.
one.
Yeah.
I have one more question. How many students do we have in the preschool arena that we are servicing?
A lot. I wanna say it's close
And
to-
do we
Is that
have
the
a
little
cost for
Mustangs?
that, or a cost?
So total preschool as of February 3rd was 131
But they are
students.
not all special education, so I wanna say it's close to, I wanna say it's like 75 or 80 are special education.
Yeah.
It's a breakdown like,
Okay.
and the other are tuition paying neurotypical peers.
And do we know how much that program has cost us for the preschool? Totally.
I don't
Is
have
that
that
in your revolving
information.
funds, or we did, so we
No, I
started
have the
to do some
revolving
analysis of
fund
revolving
stuff.
funds, which Karen is gonna get to in a few slides, but we did not yet finalize the analysis of the preschool.
Well, one of the reasons I asked that question, I do not believe a lot of people, meaning voters and residents, understand that we also service preschool, and it's mandated, and there is a cost. I just said something to somebody the other day about preschool. Well, what do you mean? That
Right.
doesn't have an effect. Well, what do you mean it doesn't have an effect?
Yeah.
So, and that's what I mean about how much are we paying? It's gotta be quite a bit. And how much of that is out of taxpayers' funding versus grant funding?
Right,
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
grant funding unfortunately is going
going down.
away.
right. We had 30,000 this year towards preschool, and that is going away next year. So,
Can I ask a question? So things that I've read online, and I am not an expert, you find folks are the experts here, is that if you introduce services early, it tends to reduce their needs for services later in life as they proceed through the education system, right? So have we done any sort of statistics on in the students that we invest in the preschool and what services they end up requiring versus if we didn't invest in it at all?
I haven't been here long enough to do any sort of longitudinal study, but I mean, you know.
Or
Yeah.
empirically,
Yeah.
from your experience, because you guys all are professional educators, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the belief behind why
Right.
we have in this country called
Right.
something called early intervention, like there is a belief,
Right.
registry,
But
your
no
brain
research.
development is changing. I know that Lori definitely wants to do some trend analysis and going forward, but she has only 6 months into the job, so hasn't had the opportunity, 8 months.
yeah, and it is, you know, it's not, I mean, you can see a trend line, but it would not be a straight trend line, because every case is different.
Sure.
But that is why you have children diagnosed early, sent to early intervention, because that is, you know, one of the periods of greatest brain growth and development. So
Yeah.
with those interventions, you're hoping to
Okay.
help close those gaps
I
as much
do,
as
yeah.
possible.
Okay, I mean, I go back to what I said previously, you know, when we did the override, it was supposed to take care of what we anticipated would be the necessary positions to do whatever had to be done. And, you know, in looking at the list of positions here, which adds up to 13, I'm wondering why at this point, you know, we need the board certified behavior analyst, a speech language pathologist, a mental health independent, et cetera. Why do we suddenly need them today when we didn't need them, you know, a year ago?
So BCBA does work a lot with the children that we've
Well-
already identified, your autistic population and your children who have global delays. And as we have been talking about, the needs of those students have been increasing. Our BCBA caseload is extremely high.
What's BCB?
Your behavioral
Board
certified,
certified
board
behavior
certified
analysis.
behavior analyst. At the elementary level, we have a BCBA with a caseload of 80. Her caseload is supposed to be no more than 25. So we're asking for 1. That still doesn't get us to where we should be.
Well, I'm saying it didn't get you to where it did last year either, but you didn't ask for it.
Well, but the other piece of it is that the number of autistic children who are needing that service is increasing tremendously.
Now, I guess what my point is, you know, if your BCBA last year was swamped, you know, with cases, last year was probably the time to ask for it in terms of the override, because the issue we have here is that the override is based on lasting a period of 5 years, and we're adding a number of different positions, and in addition to the total dollar amount you have there of $537 and some change, you know, on the shared cost budget, we also have the benefits, which are very significant. So I guess I'm saying it's unfortunate if we needed these positions that they weren't included last year and would have been part of the override, as opposed to putting them in this year, where it's going to be a strain in the budget, not only for this year, but for the next 5 years, because these were completely unanticipated costs.
I hear what you're saying. I think it's important to remember we're talking about the mandates, not just things that we would like to have, things that have serious ramifications if we do not service the needs of our children. A couple things that I can speak to, and then Lori can definitely speak probably to even more detail, but like our, your SLP, your speech language pathologist, 3 down, a lot of that position is tied to your LMPA. Again, students that we did not know last year at the time of the override that we were getting, because they did not yet age out of PI. The mental health intervention piece, which we're going to talk a lot more about when we get to our student opportunity.
I may
Pathway
need some
plan.
help with you with that soon, but that, we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, the same.
You've
here,
aged out of
Alex.
the program, Alex, sorry.
Yeah, well,
But the mental health intervention piece, which we're going to talk about in a lot more detail, this is really designed to keep more students in district who currently, if we don't do this piece, might be
Right.
going out of district. So we are, I can't answer all your questions about what happened in the
Right.
past. We have very different people at the table today providing data and insight. But I can say that we're trying, not only in FY21, but going forward, not to come back again with a list like this.
all right, but I mean, you understand my point,
Oh, I
is that
do,
that's really what,
absolutely.
to me, you know, that's where it should have been. You can make an argument because you have more of a population that you need more sped teachers as an example, but to me, you know, listening to what you said, these are people who you can probably could have made a case for that you need, and it's just unfortunate that, you know, it's going to be a strain in the budget, you know, to incorporate these people. But,
Right.
you know, it's water over the dam.
But, you know, we have to keep kind of a perspective here. Last year at this time, you also had needs, and you were staying within a certain confine that was negotiated between the Budget Balancing Subcommittee. And so, you know, I'm not sure that we could have, I mean, unless you spent the $509,000, you know. There's your total,
Right.
Yeah, but that was,
but I don't think it was there then.
No.
well, because it wasn't requested. I mean, what came out of the budget balancing last year was a number which reflected the school's requests, you know, to not only bring back, you know, staff that have been let go in the past, but to bring them forward. So if those numbers were there and they made a case for them, it's likely that they would have been included in the override. But again, it's water over the dam.
Right, and, you know, and I think, you know, and to go to the BCBA, I mean, not only has the number of autistic children increased, but the intensity of what they require has, and you can't always predict that. You know, there's, you know, I don't want to get too far into names, but, I mean, last year, that BCBA at the elementary level was doing more monitoring and measuring as opposed to direct servicing. And that has definitely changed this year. To the extent, to be honest, you know, that we had to hire someone to come in and consult from outside because we could not get a handle around the situation. So when you look at hiring one BCBA at 57,000 or sending 6 or 8 kids out at 70,000 apiece, I don't think it's a poor investment. And, you know, investing in these people to provide the services is going to keep our students in the district.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yep.
One, Teresa said something extremely interesting about what happens if we don't meet it. I'd like you to talk about that. The other thing I'd like to talk about, have we looked into the possibility of taking other towns' cases if we staff these positions? Other towns that outplace, like Westwood or whatever?
Yeah.
Would we be interested in taking some of their students if we establish some of these programs, and therefore we could take we would get the direct revenue from those towns?
I'd love to. Our programs are full.
They're full.
Okay,
The
so
only.
that's a no.
Right. So the one we have talked about is our postgraduate program.
Okay.
All right, that is the one program that we do have
Yeah.
room in and would be more than willing, and it's a great program, where we could take, you know, 5 or 6
I think that's
students.
part of the bigger picture, is that not only do we have these move-ins that have impacted the out-of-district, we have had just as many move-ins that have gone straight into our in-district programs.
Right.
And we have not increased our staffing. So we are stretched.
Okay, totally fair.
Can I,
And then I would,
Yes,
Teresa,
Bob.
just the thing about what happens if we don't cover it.
right, can I just, before you answer that, as you address that question, can you just explain, are the services the mandate, or is the staffing level the mandate? I'm sure the services are, but is there mandated staffing associated with, for example, have you hit a certain ratio of student population or that says you need 7.2 paraprofessionals? What would happen if you only had 5? Would you be out of compliance? And what would be the consequences, to Kelly's point?
Yeah, but you can probably speak to it better.
Okay, so speaking to the, so it's different depending on the position, right? So the 7.2 paraprofessionals are actually spread amongst different elementary schools for different reasons, and I can go through what each of those are if you would like. One of the paraprofessionals is for the new LEAP program, because you need to have the support within the classroom in order to facilitate inclusion. Because all of our programs support inclusion, so you need the teacher to be able to remain teaching those students that are there. You need the support of a paraprofessional to be able to facilitate the inclusion into the gen ed classrooms. 1.2 of those positions is for the PACS program at Oldham, and that comes directly attached to IEPs. The 0.2 is attached to a student who's at LMPA right now, who doesn't have a full day program, but moving on from preschool to kindergarten would require a full day of the support, so that paraprofessional needs to increase their time.
Right, from point A to 1.0.
Right. So, yep.
You finished with that? I don't want to interrupt you.
Because a student is moving on from LMPA to kindergarten, that leaves a hole in the PACS program at the LMPA. We need to backfill that in order to have the ratio of staff to students. The Callahan has a learning center position that isn't in ratio, so one of them is for there, as well as the Prescott has a learning center, it's not in ratio. The Willett has a population of students coming out of LMPA that is different than the population they've previously had. They're not a full PACS program, but they're not a full inclusion program, so we are actually starting a new classroom for them. This is a paraprofessional that would support that classroom. They're sort of an in-between autism program. And then the Prescott LBLD program, it's a threshold number. They have exceeded the ratio of special ed students to a self-contained program, so we need to add a paraprofessional to stay within the ratio.
And when we're saying ratios, those are regulations that
Right.
we have to follow.
Right,
Okay.
state
Student to
mandated.
teacher.
State
Wait,
mandated,
wait,
yeah.
Okay, Judy?
Yeah, so these are, 13 new staff that you didn't have last year?
Right.
So these children haven't been serviced at all, and we have found we've had a big hole in doing,
So it's not a factor of them not being serviced, it's a factor of the people servicing them have caseloads that are untenable.
so they didn't get the services.
Well, they're getting mediocre services, I would say.
So, and I watched your presentation when you gave it to the school committee. And frankly, I was very embarrassed, and not for you. I was very embarrassed to think,
We really like her.
She's never.
I thought you did a very good job. But I said to myself, if I was just sitting there watching the TV, I'd say, what the hell have they been doing with the school department? They haven't been servicing our people, but we're going up and up and up and up. I mean, I was embarrassed to think we have such a bad, sped system. And you come in and you just say, hey, I found this problem, that problem, this problem, that problem, and we need $10 million.
I didn't say 10 million. 10 million would be nice.
No, but I'm just saying, and somebody I know who is into this kind of business saying, you mean we have been that, derelict in our job? Because we didn't do this?
Yeah, so Lori came and was very transparent, as Dr. Thompson and I asked her to. We meet regularly as a budget subcommittee, which includes Maya as well. Also as chair, I've been in many admin meetings and with Dr. Thompson's green light meeting one-on-one with a lot of people, and really trying to dive into all of this. Personally, with the override promise, there's that fiscal responsibility, but there's also the responsibility to do right by our students. And that's why I said early on in this presentation, keep in mind that every number, every statistic represents a child.
But this is something that's just coming on the table now after we went to
Yeah.
the voters for a huge override.
No, I hear your concerns, I hear Alan's concerns, I completely hear what you're saying. I can only tell you what we're doing now and going forward with this team and with Karen and Lori both, who are willing to take the hard questions and get you the answers. And the way that they do their analysis and are trying to project us forward, I have all the confidence is going to make this conversation so much different going forward. Not directly answering your question because I don't have all the answers exactly, but I do want to publicly say I have so much confidence in this leadership team right here.
I do have one thing. I mean, I also look at the saying, are these nice to have versus have to have? And if we didn't have it, why haven't we found out why?
And I think that was a question that I was asked during my presentation is, why not more? And my response was, I could give you a 5-year plan
I heard
of where
that.
I would like us to be. But there's only so much you can ask for in a given year. So nothing here is a nice to have, really.
But we didn't know we needed it until after the,
Yeah, that
The
is, I mean,
override.
right, this is a bit of a perfect storm, okay? We've had an increase of needs, an increase of move-in with needs, plus you have some normal growth that, needs to happen as well. I mean, we knew we probably were going to have to expand some programs. We're on the wrong slide. Can we go back one? Sorry. The speech and language pathologist, that's become more of an issue because of the numbers coming into our early childhood center. The mental health piece has burgeoned at the high school in the last year and a half. So those are fairly new challenges, and as much as I would like to have a crystal clear crystal ball, a good portion of these were not anticipated. And that override budget, if you remember, was pretty much complete in November. So that is a while ago. It's a year and a half ago.
One of the things I do want to mention is, as we're talking about the School Opportunity Act, the speech and language pathologist and the mental health intervention are two things that we are looking to put into that plan. So while they're up there as things that we have mentioned in the budget that we need, those are two things that we are focusing on having removed from the budget and part of that plan. So we are looking at ways to shift things that are in here now as a budget need into the plan so that they are being funded in different ways, but they are up here as a need.
I have something to say here. The whole town for 10 years has been was before the override, needs only. And general government and the school department cut things where they could and worked very hard at staying within the amount of money that we had. The other thing I think that we need to understand is that there are more and more children with needs. And each year, we're going to see this because of those needs. And I don't know what has happened, whether it's the red Kool-Aid or whatever else. My generation will take that on our shoulders. But their children are born early, and luckily for the parents, those children are saved, but they're saved with needs, so our needs are going to go up. And that is something that we have to recognize every year. And I mean, I don't want to spend money just willy-nilly here, but I do think that our recognition of the needs of some of our students was lagging. And the same thing happened within some needs that we had within the general government, not as necessarily as important in that, you know, you can you can keep putting off buildings and a few other things, and streets and pipes and things like that. You can't save these things. That's all I'm gonna say.
I mean, I'm only numbers, so.
Yeah.
But all I can hope is that with all these new positions and with Laurie and the new programs and making changes and digging into what is really happening, that these will help you to improve your programs and not have you to have as many costs in the future. That's how I look at it, as
Right.
it's an investment in your education in hopes that you won't have to, right, before you, because it's almost like you're continually putting a Band-Aid on something. People who are somebody, because I see it in my own department that people are working, and eventually it's like, okay, I can't do these hours anymore. So I think some of the, from what I'm seeing, some people were doing that, like just working when they really needed more help. And
Well, you're absolutely right as far as the investment goes. And however, we went for a very large override.
No, I hear
My
you.
biggest concern, and my concern particularly when I saw, you know, Tony's budget proposal and adding more stuff here and there, is how are we going to sustain it without going back to the voters? And you want a new school too. We need a new school. We should have it. But things are in jeopardy if we need to go through all of this. And especially, you know, when was the override? Not long ago. And we're coming back with what appears to be new programs. They're really not. We probably should have been doing them. And I'm just thinking about how the voters are going to look on that. And they're the ones that's going to decide whether they come up with more money or not.
I hear you.
Teresa.
I'd just like to offer a slight and brief reframe. So half of my brain is always in education and development. The other half of my brain is always in public health because I have graduate degrees in both fields. A lot of what you're asking us today is the responsibility of the town in a public health manner. And there's inklings of it already starting with the collaboration that the schools have with Segal, who is amazing, and with the collaboration of Impact Norwood and Minds Matter. But a lot of the questions that you're asking of the early childhood education needs and the birth rate and premature birth that Anne is referencing, as well as the piece that we haven't even begun to dive in thoroughly here today of trauma and mental health needs. Those are mental health and physical health. That's public health. That cannot solely be the responsibility of a school system. We have a piece of that responsibility, but it is the responsibility of this whole town, and we have to work together. And a lot of the questions that you're asking should, in my opinion, be researched before these kids get into school. We need to be looking at our families prenatally through 4. And I'm not going to offer Segal to do any work, but I bet if I asked her, would she want to work on this with me, because she also has public health background. There's answers there. I'm just not sure that as an education department, we're the only people who should be either answering it, researching it, or responsible for it.
So that was my thing, this is a whole society thing, like, like, you're reacting to what's happening
Absolutely.
based on society's trends. To really get to the root cause of the problem, like Teresa just very articulately said, you have to analyze what's going on in your town, find out why it's happening, and then address that root cause. You're just reacting to the repercussions of those changes. Right, so I agree, I was gonna say the exact same thing, you are not as articulately as you did. But I think it's a bigger issue that we have to address more globally than just with the school committee.
Okay, can we move on?
Yeah, I just, yeah, and, yeah. All right, so other needs, so these are, you know, non-mandated needs, if you will. We do have 2 elementary classrooms. You might have heard that we just hired another 4th grade teacher at the Oldham because the class sizes in there are 29. So there's gonna be another teacher working in there and co-teaching. That cohort is going to go to 5th grade next year. So that's one of those 2 positions. The other one is an elementary 1st grade position at the Cleveland. Elementary psychologist, again, with the increased students who are qualifying and on IEPs, they basically do the testing piece to see if people are qualifying and making judgment, but that caseload has become rather overbearing, let's say. A district-wide registrar, this is something that we've talked about for a couple years. This is someone to centralize our school registration. Currently, our elementary schools do not do any registration over the summer, which is partially why in September and October we are scrambling because of populations who register 5 days before school opens. We did get lucky a little bit this past summer where some people who have districts, who came from districts with central registration, came to the central office and found their way to special education, because otherwise we probably would have had more students at out-of-district placements because we had the chance to talk to them about trying our in-district programming. So without that, that would have been at least 2 other out-of-district placements.
Do other school systems of the same size have in-district placement? Like,
Yes.
Okay.
But they.
I mean, I have an in-district registrar,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes.
Not ours, articulate,
Yes,
sorry.
but this would allow us to have a 12-month person doing that, one person registering everybody.
And they do kindergarten as well?
The-
They do everything? Okay.
Everything, right. So you have one person who knows the rules, following the regulations, making sure
Kinda like
all of the.
voter registration, right?
Right,
We have
making
somebody
sure
who does voter
all the
registration,
paperwork is in and done the same way.
Got it.
You know, since I have been here, this is my 3rd year, every August is rigging of the hands, wondering who is going to, you know, who's going to show up on our door 5 days before school opens. You know, the other piece is our homeless person. We'd have this person take over that responsibility. Right now, it's split between several different people. That is problematic at times. Consistent in transportation, consistent in the paperwork, as far as nursing, special education. It's all in one place, and you know, using that process. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything else to that.
Are these numbers inside or outside the 3.5%?
This is all above the apples to apples comparison. So we had the apples to apples comparison we did, that was within the 3.5%.
Okay,
Next layer was ELL, next layer is special ed.
okay,
This is the next layer of other needs, not mandated, but things that after a lot of discussion with the administrators and the budget subcommittee, we've identified our needs that we want to at least consider, continue to consider.
okay,
And then the next layer that we're going to is out of district.
okay, except that, I mean, the way I read the pledge, you know, the pledge, you know, allowed you to add additional services for things, you know, such as mandates and special education, ELL, statutorily required positions, et cetera, et cetera. And you were limited, you know, under the pledge, to no more than 5 benefit positions in any one year. Now, this represents 4 positions, but it was always my understanding that these types of positions were within the 3.5%. They weren't outside the 3.5%.
Yes.
Right.
Tony?
We're not-
There's a line there that either the positions or the dollar amount wouldn't apply to what's mandatory,
Correct.
Right.
so.
Correct. And these,
But
you
these
know.
These aren't mandated,
These
correct?
aren't.
These are not mandated
These
are not
positions,
mandated.
so it's my argument that this isn't $223,000 in addition to the 3.5%. These are numbers which should be within the 3.5%.
Yes, I would
Yeah.
agree with what you're saying now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why we
Right.
pulled them out separately, and they're not
Okay, so.
in with the mandated needs.
Right.
All right, so, okay, so that, but that's not, is this money, again, you know, maybe I don't understand, but is, you're taking your 3.5%, then you're taking your ELL, your out of district, your special education, et cetera. Now, is this 223 on top of that, or is that within the 3.5% that
that
you're
in?
already taking?
No, this is not within the 3.5%, and the
It's
reason.
outside.
It's outside, and we separated it because we really wanted you and the community and everybody to understand what we're looking at within the 3.5%.
Okay.
And, you know, our feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Thompson, is that what we shared with you so far in the baseline, apples to apples as we were calling it, is not level funded, it's not level services. Because it doesn't need mandated needs, it doesn't also include some of these. Now, the school committee has not yet fully discussed all
Okay.
this. The school committee could vote not to include one or all of these in our budget. We have not yet had that conversation, so it is important to realize that.
Okay, I mean, I'm just saying that, you know, that amount of money, you know, is outside the 3.5%. Is the way I've always interpreted it, and I
Yes.
think that's consistent. So if you're looking for that, that's in addition to the 3.5%, which technically is contrary to what's asked for or what's agreed to in the pledge.
Right, but
Correct.
we don't have a finalized FY '21 budget
Right.
at this point. But I agree with you, this should come under that
Okay.
3.5%. What we're doing tonight is we're telling you we're telling you where the school department is. We're telling the story of the
Okay.
budget problems that the
Okay.
budget drivers that we're having. We're not presenting a final
Okay,
budget.
gotcha, understood.
So this
Okay.
technically could just be part of the 3.5%.
Right.
Separate than this.
Eventually.
Right.
If then another 223,000
But there's another
is
piece to
taken out.
this that's gonna cost the town, which is the benefit package, which comes under shared costs. That's gonna go up. That'll take money off the table too.
True,
Which
but
is
I mean,
the benefits.
but under the pledge, they're allowed a certain number.
it's not their problem,
They're
but
allowed,
it's-
they're allowed a certain number of positions.
Oh, yeah, but it comes down to the bottom line dollar in order to support it. And
Yeah.
there's a benefit
Okay.
package there too that
Right.
has to be funded.
Okay. Let's go
Are there any
on.
mandates on classroom sizes? On traditional classroom sizes? No.
All right, next one. Where are they?
Out of district. Do it. What is that? That's you.
Did we do the circuit breaker yet?
No.
No, circuit breaker's free.
Oh,
Okay.
Can we go to the next one?
Yep. Oh, that's Karen.
oh, okay. I have mine out of order then.
They are,
Okay, so we're working on other revenue sources. So I gave you some handouts. So if you want to pull out the revolving fund offsets. And the grants. And I can relate those with
These two.
And top revolving.
you. So I'm gonna start with this one here.
Yeah,
Yep.
Everybody got it?
awesome.
Okay. So the revolving fund, obviously there's other revenue sources in addition to the general fund that support your schools. So for the other revenue sources, these are the offsets that we have in for this FY '21 budget. For the for the bus fees, we have 400,000, and that is increased from 200,000 in the last year's budget. The athletic fees is 100,000 in the FY '21, and that was increased from 90,000 in the FY '20 budget. And we also have fine arts fees of $30,000, and that was increased from 16,500 in the FY20 budget. I will go over a little bit more on that revolving fund, but we also have grant awards in FY20, which were in the amount of $1,834,752. Okay? With regard to the revolving accounts, I did analyze the revolving accounts to make sure that the money was there for these offsets. So with the athletic revolving fund, you have the athletic revolving fund, and you also have the school athletic user fees. Currently, the athletic revolving, which is the revolving fund that has your gate receipts in it, that has a balance of $21,412. The revenue that you have to date in that account is $23,087. The school athletic user fees, and that's where the athletic user fees from the athletes comes in. Currently, you have a balance of $99,737. The current revenue for this year thus far was $88,850. So we felt that the $100,000 offset appeared to be a decent offset for that, and it would really be leave the athletic revolving with no money. The transportation revolving, your school bus fees, that had a larger balance in it. It appeared that last year you didn't have as large offset with that. The offset for FY20 is the 200,000, but I think FY19, I'm not sure if you had a large offset on that, because your beginning balance was 321,362. The ending balance as of right now is 324,104. The revenue to date for FY20 is 229,019. So it appears like that transportation revolving offset of $400,000 is doable for the FY21 budget. The fine arts is kind of a little bit difficult to come to the exacts on that one. You've got several different ones on that one. You have a drama operational, which is where you have people who pay for, it appears to be drama lessons or something like that in that. That one has a balance right now of $19,082. The revenue thus far to date is $15,531. There is also a music revolving, which is a donation account. That one has $32,350, but with no real detail on what is a restricted donation and what isn't a restricted donation. I really don't feel like you should take that much from that account. Because if a donation is restricted for a certain purpose, it has to be used for a certain purpose. So I'd have to get into greater detail in order to find out the restrictions. You also have some fine arts performance fees, and those are mixed in on a revolving account that says student activities, which includes field trips, fine arts performances, and some testing fees at the high school. So that currently has a balance of $58,422. So currently we have a $30,000 fine offset, but that one I think needs to be reevaluated and make sure that that will be sustainable as we get to the next budget.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, when your bus fees, is that also a sustainable number?
Well, the way I looked at it was, you have 324,000, and then you're gonna be, right now you have revenue of 229.
Yeah,
So if I take the 324 that you have plus the 229, then you're over, what's that, 550,000?
yeah,
So you're not gonna have as large a balance to begin with,
okay. You think it's still sustainable at a similar amount, in
I think-
FY22?
It appears to be the only thing that I would look further into that one is because with your increase in special education students, you have an increase in special education transportation.
Yep.
And right now, according to the Director of Transportation, that is increasing.
Mhm.
He does a lot of in-house, he doesn't do a lot of outside contracted, but he's getting to a point where he's at like a capacity of using all his vans and his, van drivers, so that would be the only thing that I would worry about in that
Okay.
area. So, analysis as of today, which I always think of a budget as a snapshot in time today. And that would be my snapshot in time today
Okay.
on your revolving.
Okay.
Do we, for the bus fees, obviously there's a charge for students to take the bus, right? Do we get, for students that are under a certain income threshold, do we get reimbursed for those bus fees from the state, or the town just absolves them?
The only reimbursement right now is for the McKinney-Vento students.
Okay.
The homeless students.
Okay.
Last year, I think it was about 45,000, but that is not a revolving fund, that goes into your pot.
Goes into, okay.
General
Okay, so there's, so, okay, got it, so there's no reimbursement for transportation, got
Does
it.
it, McKinney-Vento there is,
For that, but for others, there's none.
but for others, well, there is,
Well, the good news is for Circuit Breaker this year, there's going to be, we're still waiting to hear what it actually is gonna be, but supposedly there will be a portion
Something that-
of transportation, part of Circuit Breaker
Yeah.
reimbursement this year.
So that will cover, special ed transportation,
it's only gonna be a
Piece of it.
portion.
a portion of
A
transportation.
And
small,
over the next couple of years, it'll tier in.
it will
Okay.
tear up. The only other thing with that is, when I was at Mashpell a couple months ago, they talked a little bit about it. And because we have mostly in-house, we're gonna have to, Al and I are gonna have to work on trying to figure out the actual costs of our transportation, because we don't have a clear-cut contracted service cost this. And then, like Laurie said, they're gonna tear it up, so it's not like a large amount of money that comes on the first year.
It's better
Well, every
to-
little bit
it's-
Some we
yeah.
got,
It will
never
help.
had.
We don't have it now, so.
Right, it's better,
Right.
than what we're getting now, but yeah.
Right, I think it's gonna be good to have it, but it's not something as a snapshot in time that you can say right now, we'll probably get like $50,000
And we
or
don't know what
whatever.
it is.
We don't know how they're gonna do that, how they're gonna expect that report to show your expenditures. So,
Okay.
regard to us purchasing the vans rather than contracted, so there's gonna be some training on, how they want us to do that. Okay? Moving on to, the grants, I'll do the grants next. What I gave you in the grants is, a spreadsheet of the grant awards, that we have this year for FY '20, in hopes that next year we'll get similar grant awards. You have the grant awards, it also has the categories for which those monies for the grants have to be spent. It's this big long one.
Yep, got it.
So the grants have to be spent in the categories that you sign, when you apply for a grant, you sign up for your money to be spent in a certain way. And unless you amend your grant, you have to spend that money in that way. So this is the categories for which each grant it has for their monies. It gives you the total awards, which the total FY '20 award for all of these grants are $1,834,752. And the grants that are shaded in the blue are the special education grants in particular. So I gave you a little bit on that. I also gave you the full-time equivalencies of the grant positions. So there's a spreadsheet here that gives you the positions that are in each grant. So right now, on these grants here, and including your preschool tuition revolving account and your rent revolving account, you have 33.1 full-time positions that are funded by the revolving in your grant.
Could I ask a question? Is the benefit package cost included in that grant?
In the grants it is.
All of them? All of it?
Well,
In the
it
grant.
says fringes, which I assume refers to that.
In the grant it is. that-
Here.
'cause
And the
that's-
titles it does.
And that's money that then is moved into the shared costs where the benefit is paid out
We
of?
have to, when we put in our grant application, we have to attribute, and also retirement.
But does that get transferred to the shared costs?
No.
You mean like go into the town as revenue?
However it gets there.
Well, a good example would be if you look at the 240 grant, the Individual with Disabilities Act,
Yeah.
that has your largest position, so if you see the fringe benefit is $204,285.
How do they
So-
arrive at that?
The grant manager, when they were applying for these grants, the way they're supposed to do the grant application is to look and see what the benefits are for the positions that he's putting into the grant, and what the retirement portion is for the positions that he's putting into the
And how does that
grant.
get transferred, Tony?
Usually
Into-
it's a journal entry, sort of automated journal entry where when we book that person's health insurance cost, it's X% here or Y% there. So it's sort of just, we do a bunch of recurring journal entries every month, and that's where they would take the money out of, usually. But every grant's a little different.
Okay.
Karen, thank you for this. I know I had asked you for this. Do we, I don't see it here, do we have an end date or a date when one of these grants would have to be redone, applied for?
I don't have it on here now, but,
But
on
you know.
on the next, yes, I do know. A lot of the title grants are 2-year grants. So right now, what I gave you was the FY '20 awards. But on the next report to you, what I want to give you is the balances in the grants and how much money has been expended. So that will be on the next round. It's just I have to really dig in and with your, with the munis and the challenges with munis right now. I tried to give you as much as I could with regard to the grants, but that is my, the next step is what right now I have a couple of girls analyzing the grants. And spreadsheets there, I developed spreadsheets for each grant, and I've asked, there's 2 girls that I want them to put all the information with regard to the grants into these spreadsheets, and from those spreadsheets, I want to compare them to Munis and make sure that Munis is matching with these spreadsheets. So if you'll find with me that I won't report unless I feel confident in the numbers, and I did not feel confident with those numbers yet,
Okay.
so I can't, but we are in the process of doing that right now. So then when I do an end of year report for this, there'll be a column with the balance remaining that's going to carry over to the next year, and also a column that will state the date the final report was sent to the Department of Education. And that, I feel like, is not only important to report to the committee, school committee and yourselves, but also if somebody else comes in for, like, say I retire, somebody else comes in, then they have that information going forward. So that would be that's the hope of how I want to report on the grants. So we're in the process of doing that right now.
And who particularly renews the grants? Who goes after the grants?
We had a grant manager who
We
just
have a-
So they
have a-
keep track of it, and then they would make sure.
Yeah, it's a
They know the
combination
date.
of
Like the 240 grant, which is a DEA grant, like I do with the grant manager. It all depends
right.
which
grant it is.
Okay, but you're the one that would be able to tell whether it's being worked on and renewed.
Well, we're making a change right now. We're in the process of making a change. There's a new grant manager coming in. And we actually have a meeting this week. So how we want the process to go now is the grant manager will be the one who would do the educational side of the grant. She's gonna find new grants, she's gonna do all this application. From that point, it will be, she has to coincide with the finance department to make sure that it's spent properly.
Right.
So
Yeah, and there's actually kind of 2 pieces. There's the
Right.
financial tracking piece of it and reporting out, and there's also the programmatic piece.
Right.
And Dr. Wyatt, the assistant superintendent, does a lot of, or Lori, if it's the special ed grant, is more the program piece.
So we're working on making sure that measures properly, that when they're spending it, the finance department knows what they're spent, so we can be on watch to make sure that everything's matching in the meeting system. So that's the grants, that's the staffing. The preschool tuition, for example, has a couple of paras and a teacher in it. Your rent has a 0.50 of a custodian that's charged to that account. Right, so that is
Great.
grants and revolving. You're welcome.
Thank you.
We like it.
And then
Stuff.
the final piece is the circuit breaker, all right?
Oh, yes.
So I'm gonna start with the history of the circuit breaker. So I gave you a sheet here, and at the bottom I put a little cheat sheet because I bring this to every meeting to make sure if anybody asks me about circuit breaker, I know exactly what department head says it is. So the circuit breaker educational reimbursement program, for those who don't know what that program is school districts are eligible for reimbursements of expenditures for students whose special education program costs more than 4 times the state foundation budget. By law, the districts are reimbursed up to 75% of the cost above the threshold, subject to appropriation. So the highest percentage reimbursement you will get is 75% after you meet that threshold, okay? So that's the program in a nutshell, just a little bit on that. So with regard to your circuit breaker history, I went back to FY16. I pulled these records from the Department of Ed website. So you'll see your history in FY16. And the way it works is your reimbursement, so in FY16, you're reimbursed on your FY15 student detail, okay? So at the top, I put the reimbursement year, and then I put below it based on the FY15 student detail. So you see in FY16, your total reimbursement was $1,625,193. In FY20, I'll move all the way up to FY20, it's $2,074,740. I gave you a lot of detail here on, you'll see you've got the number of students that were eligible for the circuit breaker, the foundation per student. For example, in FY16, based on the FY15 student detail, your foundation per student was $41,944. So a district has to, you're not
It's
gonna
four
get-
times the base, right? Yeah,
So you're not gonna get any money for reimbursement unless it's child's cost more than that.
yeah.
So there is that amount. So I gave you the detail from FY16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, all right? At the bottom, you'll see your budgeted circuit breaker. So I could not find it for FY16. For FY17, I have, it was $1,315,320. Again, that was your budget, when you did your budget, the circuit breaker. And then you'll see each year, FY18, FY19, and FY20 this year, it's $2,100,000. One other thing to note on, before I get to the estimates for FY21, is in FY17, based on your FY16 students, you did get extraordinary relief. Extraordinary relief is the SPED Circuit Breaker program provides a provision that allows districts to claim for extraordinary relief when your claimable SPED costs exceed 125% of the previous year's claims. So it's a fairly high threshold they have to meet in order to get your extraordinary relief. And you did get that in FY17. In FY20, which was based on FY19, you also got some special indicator money. The special indicator money is students that fall into the following categories may be eligible for 100% of the circuit breaker. So they don't have to do that 75%, they can get the 100%. And those are students that abandoned, homeless, or state woods. So you had some students in FY18 students that met that category of the special indicator, okay? Perhaps you may get that this year. The FY20, the FY20 that I gave you is based on the actuals that I see on the Department of Ed website right now, your reimbursement. At the end of the year, they often will give, you usually will get a little bit more after they review it all. You get a little bit more for special education, higher costs or something. And then when Laurie and her department does a circuit breaker, if there's any students in the special indicators. So until the end of year, this is based on what I know right now you're getting in. It's already, you know, the state already has it in 4 increments, and that's exactly what you're getting thus far. So you're, again, your snapshot on what we have today. All right? Then we go over to the FY21 estimate. So when I did the FY21 estimate, we based it on the total eligible expenses of $6,168,127. That was, we did this when we started the budget, so that was based on your student detail as of January 6th, okay? At that time, there was a number of students, it was 59. Your foundation per student, 45,793. And so the total reimbursement, we did a 70%, which is lower than your 75%, but we decided to go lower rather than higher. So the total adjusted reimbursement is $2,426,438. So that's the estimate on the figures that we had at that time.
Okay.
Okay?
I mean, you look at the reimbursement rate over the years, and it's always been over 70%. It's been
Right.
closer to 75%, so I'm not really sure. I mean, I understand why it's nice to be conservative, but on the other hand, you know, this is tight budget year, you're asking for more money, significantly more money than what originally was anticipated when we did the override, so I don't understand why you wouldn't go up to 75%.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because we did go over, we are at, this budgeted circuit breaker is $2,755,000.
Oh, cool.
Okay?
Very, thank you. 2 million,
You'll see it's right down below.
It's the bottom number.
The bottom figure there.
very good, okay, well,
And then if you, the next sheet, which is
okay.
circuit breaker budget to actual. So here I'm going to go over 3 scenarios, okay? So the first scenario is FY20 budget. So this is if your FY20 budget stayed the same. You didn't get any more students, you're going straight with your FY20 budget. So you had an FY19 carryover of $1,604,093. Your FY19 circuit breaker revenue is $2,083,949, which gives you a revenue of $3,688,042. Your total out-of-district sped tuition, $5,523,926. Again, we're using budgeted figures. Your circuit breaker reimbursement offset was $2,100,000. So if everything stayed the same in budget, you would have had an ending balance of $264,116. Okay. Then we're going to go next into the next scenario, which is FY21 estimated actual, and this is using the today's Munis numbers. As of my tuition, that's my tuition and my encumbrance, that's in Munis as of today, all right? So the FY20 budget, $3,423,926. Your expended was, as of today, was $1,741,898. Your encumbrances, $3,040,045. Which gives it available balance of a negative $1,358,017. The available circuit breaker revenue to date is $1,128,459, and that is because I already did some circuit breaker adjustments on there. And then you have your anticipated circuit breaker revenue for your third and fourth quarter, which is $1,041,974. So at this snapshot, your estimated available balance at the end of this year would be $812,416. Keep in mind that if we get additional out-of-district students in, or if you do get extraordinary relief revenue, then that number could change. But again, a snapshot today, that is the estimate of the actual.
Would we use that to prepay the following year?
The 812,
Carry it over.
it would carry over.
Okay, so it's in case you get a couple extensive placements that you could cover. Okay, got it.
Because my opinion is never leave your circuit breaker at 0 the following year, because you could, I mean, this is one of those years where it kind of proves that you don't
You
want
would
to
have to
leave
do a
your
town meeting to get the money.
circuit breaker at
Okay,
0.
got it.
Right.
But
Got
this is just to show you where we would be if this. And then the final scenario is the FY21 estimated budget. So if I use that $812,416 as my estimate that that's the money that I would have left, and I used the circuit breaker 70% reimbursement, that gives you the estimated available funds of F21 budget of $3,238,854. I have my offset of $2,755,000. That brings your available balance at your carryover to be $483,854. So you can see a significant drop in what you had in your carryover.
All right, so essentially what you did was you used a portion of your carryover to increase the FY21 estimate, okay? So you're still at 70%. On the other hand, if it goes up to 75%, then that simply increases your available balance.
Right.
Correct?
And we
Okay.
are-
So, you know, whichever way you do it, it really doesn't matter. I mean,
Right.
because the result is what I'm looking for. Okay.
The other thing to note is that the extraordinary relief, Laurie and her staff
Yes.
are already in the process of working on applying for the extraordinary relief, which as soon as we get those figures, if we do, get the extraordinary relief, then again, then we can change this.
So
But at
the-
this time, this is what we have.
The
for
ending
now.
balances can only be used for special ed? You
Special ed
can't move that
tuition.
around?
Special
and-
ed out-of-district
Out of
tuition only.
district tuition. Right.
Right. But in this case, this year, perfect storm, it's a good thing we had that. Otherwise, we would have been asking for a special town meeting.
So if you do this out, each out-of-district placement costs us over $100,000 each.
It depends on,
About 110,000 just for me,
Some
eyeballing
of
it.
them are 250,
Yeah.
some
Right.
of them are 50.
But the average,
But if you're doing an average, if you got 10 more cases, you'd expect $1.2 million. Depending on, I get you can. Yeah.
Heart palpitations.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's me unless you have any questions.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you very much, very informative.
Okay. So next slide, I think Lisa, oh, here we go.
That brings us to the out-of-district tuitions. and
Yeah.
the current situation. So Karen went over a lot of this, but what our current situation is with out-of-district budget, out-of-district tuitions. So at the January presentation for school committee, I went over where we were. This is a forever moving target. I could every month give you an update of where we are at, and it would never be anywhere near where it was the month before.
That's a snapshot in time.
It is absolutely, and it is
You got it.
constantly fluid. So, you know, we are looking at a significant increase for FY '21. A big portion of that story is move-ins, which I know we have been talking about. And gave you the preview and at the budget subcommittee meeting, but you know, a huge impact on the FY '20 budget of out of district was move-ins. 6 students at a cost of about $430,000 that wasn't budgeted for. Which we are actualizing in real time now in FY '20, which has an impact obviously carrying forward on FY '21. And an additional 3 students who are about $600,000 looking at FY '21, for whom we are currently programmatically responsible but not yet fiscally responsible due to the move-in law.
So that's
So-
total of 9.
So that is a total of 9 for $1 million.
Do you have any information on the history of those? Of, did they come here for apartments? Did they buy houses? Did they just come because they like us? We got a wonderful town. Did they come from a town that they also had special ed outplacement
Oh,
there?
yes, so,
Yeah.
yes, every one of them came with an IEP already outplaced.
Already in the outplace.
And we're not allowed to modify that plan. Even if we had a program in-house,
If we had a program in-house
Could we modify
comparable, we could, parents have, you know, stay put rights legally.
okay.
It's very hard to take a student from an out-of-district placement and immediately move them in district. We obviously work with the families once we get to know them, and if we feel it appropriate to move them in, we'd move them in, but to immediately move them
Oh,
in
no, no,
is
no, the
very
transition
difficult,
would be
right?
very disruptive, especially for a student that
Correct.
needs the services, so,
Correct.
yeah.
So we absolutely are constantly working with all of our families
Okay.
to make sure that they are in the least restrictive environment. That means movements even within out-of-district programs to be looking at more restrictive to less restrictive programs. That is also part of the story of what was budgeted for in last school year to FY '20. Is that we had a change in 30 of our students in out of district that were budgeted at one cost and actualized at a different cost to the tune of $422,000. As I shared at the school committee meeting, 6 of those students were at one school to the cost of $111,000. OSD is the organization that sets the rate of out of
Oh, I
district.
should ask who sets the rates, okay.
And one school got a price change, and it cost us $111,000 in August for that one price change. So there are a lot of variables that go into it. Unfortunately, this is a perfect storm for us this year. In my first year here in Norwood. So we have done the analysis of it. I can tell you exactly you know, as Teresa said at the beginning, each one of these numbers has a story behind it and is a student. I can tell you exactly who has moved from A to B, and what number is behind it, but, this is the situation that we are in. We currently have 62 students out of district. When it's all said and done, we will have serviced about 68 students. Some students have gone out and come back in. So the total cost for this year will be around 68 to 70 students.
Can I ask 2 questions, because I'm big on numbers? So, so how many students do we have total in special education enrollment?
You have to ask me that, 780, I think.
Okay, so we have less than 10% placement rate, out of district placement rate.
Yeah.
What's a standard placement rate in a standard town or a town like ours? Is it higher, is it lower, is it the same? Like, what does that look like?
7 to 10%.
7 to 10%? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, our overall special education rate is very high. We're at 20.7%. State average is 18%.
Okay.
National average is 12.
Okay, and then one of the things that I think would be helpful, and I don't know if everyone agrees with me, but these things are mandates, and I would actually like to see them removed from the school committee budget and tracked separately, so that we can see what the impacts are of mandate on the overall school budget. So what we've done in the past is, right, more mandates have come up, and we've cut out of the budget, cut to get our mandates.
Yes.
And the experience for our traditional students is being degraded, right? Because we have to spend that money.
Yes.
What I would like to see over time is how these are impacting our community as large, and since they're mandates, I feel like they should be tracked separately and outside of the traditional school budget. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that would be an accurate way to depict it for the public too, so they could see what's actually driving schools. Is it Teresa and Dr. Thompson wanting to spend a bunch of money that they don't have? Or is it mandates, right? Like, so they wanna have a party for all of us, like what is it, right?
And there's certainly a case to be made, that your special education numbers are only gonna, you know, they may be where they are because the general education has been eaten away at.
For sure.
We haven't solidified our general education, therefore you have to turn to special education.
'Cause you're more
To
reactive.
get what you need.
Yep.
Because it doesn't exist in general education.
But when you have 30 kids in a class, it's hard to give individualized attention to kids.
I'm gonna share something right now with
We have
Kelly. When they first started working on the budget, there were 2 columns, and in this one,
Yep.
in this
Awesome.
pass, there were the 2 columns,
So I don't
that's-
think it's a problem separating out that budget and keeping track of 2 budgets, right?
Well, that's how we got to this whole layered approach
No
as
problem.
well. We
Yeah,
started
because-
with-
Is it a problem maintaining it moving forward? I just think it's really eye-opening to see this information.
Yeah.
Right, but we're only,
This was the
but
first
those columns are only
And
tracking
lots of-
what we added this year, not
All
all
the
of the
special ed,
Right.
Right, so that's,
you know, new
It would be
requirements.
great to see that,
Right.
because that tells a very different story, or it tells an accurate story of what's really going on in our town. And then we can look at, why is this, and we could try to,
And-
like you said, address those underlying factors.
Yeah, I mean, we have a budget subcommittee meeting on Wednesday, we can talk about this a little bit more then and see with all the different moving pieces.
Do you mean keeping all of sped costs separately or just the Band-Aids?
well, I think it's just a separate account, it's like
I
a
think we
double
have it.
counting, so you have, you're not necessarily taking them out of the school budget, but.
I would say it's out of placement, I think it's any mandate. I would like to see ELL separate, I'd like to see sped separate, and I'd like to see these distinct placements separate.
Can we do that with Munis?
With Munis, you should be able to do that by coding it.
I mean, that's what I would like to see,
You can keep it the
because I
way you
think
have
that's.
it, but you can move it
I don't know how we
to
would do
track
that.
it.
I don't know how you do is.
Maybe we don't have to problem solve it here, but I just
Right.
think, what I think we should do for any budget, what I would do in a company, is I would take things I'm mandated to spend,
Yeah.
like fixed cost,
Yeah.
those, and then I have my overhead costs, which can fluctuate. They're 2 different line items, they're 2 different budgets that I manage, and they need to be managed different, because this thing, we can't touch. It has to be provided. And so I think if we could track that moving forward, that's gonna make it a lot easier to be able to make these arguments as to what's going on in the town and why things are changing and why this additional money is
Yeah,
needed.
we can
I don't
definitely.
know if there's something like, I mean, just really thinking off the top of my head, if it could be a count number that is a different
Or some
count
kind of a
number
code
for
in the
Band-Aid.
transaction, just flip it
Tag it
over
or
to
whatever.
it.
But that
You
would be
can still
awesome.
do it your own way, but you can code it so it can flip and come out, right? They-
It would
I
have to
know
be
what we're
going
talking
forward.
about.
Well, I mean,
Well, I think the DESI
Okay.
report does that at the end of the year, anyway.
I mean, because you have to report this to the state. These numbers your special ed costs get reported to the state. They're on the DLS
Yeah, yeah.
website.
Yes.
So there's gotta be a way that we've been doing it, just like, we asked the question about how we've been tracking revenues, right? There's gotta be a way you could do it, just someone somewhere is reporting this to the state.
Well, you
And it's
have
being
to,
published.
you have to separate all your sped costs.
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying, do you mean all your sped costs? Because at the end of the year report, you have to separate your special ed costs from your regular ed costs. And you have to separate them out by school.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's easy to do. But I
Now,
thought
this
you
would-
meant just like some of special ed costs are not mandated, right?
How
But
much
this
of
is-
that is depends.
Well, I think it's easy to separate out the out-of-district costs.
Right.
That's easy.
That's easy.
I mean, that's relatively easy.
That's already pretty much separated out.
You know, and to me, that's the thing I'm most concerned about, most interested in. Because, if we look into the future, maybe too close to, the end of budget, to the budget year of FY '21 to really do something for FY '21. But in the future, we may want to look at whether we want to set up some specific accounts, for special education. Whether it's inside of, probably better to be outside the school budget.
Yeah,
Because
I had
it's a
that.
variable number. Some years the number will be higher, some years the number will be lower.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, but your budget essentially is intact, is whole, and really, isn't impacted, by whether the number is higher or lower in a given year. I mean, we'd have to take a look at that and how that could potentially, be addressed in the overall budget scheme, shared costs, et cetera, but that's really mechanics more than anything else, but it's something I think we should start to give a hard look at. Maybe not for '21, but at least for '22.
Yeah, I did download the advisory on the Special Education Stabilization Fund.
Yeah.
If that was something that we wanted to go forward with in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think we should give some real hard thought to.
Yeah.
And even if you could just get the total special education cost, that gives you a pretty good idea of how mandates are going. Because I would probably argue that most special education cost is mandated.
Right. Yep.
So we have one more final layer to share with you.
Yeah.
I wish.
Right.
Because
Don't worry, Alan,
there's-
this is the top of the cake.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, so
I
you might need to flip back and forth on that. There we go. All right, so there is this other spinning plate that is going on, and Teresa alluded to it earlier. But the legislature's passed the Student Opportunities Act. Student Opportunities Act, as I pre-warned last spring, that if it did happen, it would come with strings. Well, we have strings. So they passed this in October, and we have to put together a plan, a 2-year plan in this first edition, to show how we are going to close achievement gaps with one of our low achieving groups. So we have already started that process, have identified special ed as the group that we want to target. And again, the belief is that if you have good quality instruction, it helps all students. But we have to design a plan that is going to show and measure how we're going to close the gap. So the governor's budget, I think we had 1.58 million. I think the House budget, I just looked, they're saying 1.53 million. But out of that, the recommendation is that out of that increased Chapter 70 aid, that we have 600,000 that we're supposed to use towards the Student Opportunities Act plan. Now, the nice thing about that is some things that are in your budget, you can shift to that money. But the other pieces, you actually have to have a plan that's articulated, measurable, and doable, so it really can't be all 600,000. So we've started that. The difficulty is that I'm trying to develop with my team a plan while we're also got this thing spinning over here, which is called the budget, making that all work. And how fast this spins or when this is done is going to influence how much we could possibly scrape out of the regular budget. So this is and the frustrating part is that normally you have you spend a year putting together a plan. We basically got instructions the 1st of February, and we have to have this to the school committee by the 25th of March for them to vote on it. So it's becoming a bit of a chore. Good chore, because 600,000 is nothing to sneeze at. But the other thing I want to point out with that, basically the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed has split this into two groups: those that are not getting a significant increase in Chapter 70 aid, which is below 1.5 million, and those that are getting a significant increase in Chapter 70 aid. And that is based on the formula, based on the high need students we have in our population. So Norwood is one of 14 communities in the state that has to do the long form, because we are over 1.5 million. We are considered one of the top 14 districts in the state that has, a high incident of high need students, which is why we've gotten more money. Now, the good news with the Chapter 70 aid is it is supposed to be increasing over time. It is going to include special ed transportation at this point. But we will have to continue with that plan and use that money towards that plan. Hopefully that will keep going up over the next couple of years. But that's the other part of the program.
Because in the, preliminary budget that we have, just a very draft budget, it shows a $600,000 increase for this number. So essentially what you're saying is you're gonna go back and sharpen the pencils, and it's possible, highly likely, but at least possible, that the actual hit to the budget, added hit to the budget, won't be 600,000.
No, I think the
No.
student
So-
opportunities number is about 600,000, that's only gonna, it might be 592. Where the superintendent and the school committee are deciding is what's a new cost, what's absorbed in their current budget.
But what I'm saying is, if it's absorbed in the current budget, then the actual, we get 600,000, but the actual impact of the budget could be less than 600.
Oh, it will.
All
be.
right, that's my point,
Yeah,
okay.
it will be,
Good,
somewhere between 200 to maybe
Oh,
300,000
good, okay.
out of that.
That's,
You mean
Is
some
my-
of the expenses that are
Right, some
currently
of
in our
them,
budget
right.
are gonna move over to that side?
right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Right, so
Yeah.
this is, unlike the title grants where you cannot supplant what's in a
Right.
regular budget, you can do some supplanting.
good,
here.
okay, that's
But the
good
problem
to
is,
hear.
in order to
You
build a
gotta
plan.
go through this whole list of things. to-
Exactly.
Well,
Well, that's,
again, it's the-
well, that's the easy part. You have to design
Yeah.
a plan that's measurable, because if you don't show you're closing
Yeah.
the gaps, then you end up in, I guess, Student Opportunity Act jail. I'm not
Again,
quite sure where we end up
Again,
at this point.
Again,
But-
it's the golden rule. Who
Right.
makes the gold,
That's what I said.
who has the
Right.
gold makes the rules.
Right.
And at
So-
some point, someone's going to come and look at that plan, how we implemented it,
We have
and
to,
maybe
right, well,
say
it's funny,
we're
I was.
disallowing something.
Right, I
in.
was talking to a colleague of mine who's only getting an extra $30 per student, and he only had $30 per student. And he's doing the short form, so his joke is that he's being asked to hit a home run with a bat with no end on it. So, but I'm looking at that saying, well, geez, I'm one of 14 that are gonna have to put together a plan to the department. I can guarantee there's going to be a microscope involved
Yeah.
with our plan.
Do
So
you know
that's
what the other 14 towns are? I'm just curious.
a lot of the gateway cities, Lawrence, Fall River.
No,
Brockton.
Clinton's
Brockton.
one.
Yeah,
That's where I was from.
yeah, yeah. So 14, I wanna say 14, it might be
Changing, for
16,
sure.
so don't quote me.
For sure, 100%.
Okay, and then I think we have one more slide?
Yeah, just to wrap up and let you know all the work that we still have ahead, that we know we have ahead of us. Wednesday, Dr. Thompson is meeting with his administrative team to work more on the SOA. We also have a budget subcommittee meeting Wednesday. And again, next week, we meet once or twice a week as a budget subcommittee. They're my best friends. But we do have a number of full school committee meetings as well, March 11th, 18th, and 25th. March 25th is our budget hearing. We know we need to get the budget to you March 26th at 9 a.m. That is on our radar. And then just to go back to what Dr. Thompson was talking about with the pressure of all this, on the 25th, the school committee will be approving the Student Opportunities Act plan because it is due to DESE on April 1st. So that is our month.
Thank you.
Okay.
But thank you very much for your time and your questions and
Thank you for these explanations.
While we're all here,
We thought you were gonna get
I
to
know.
continue.
No, just a, maybe a quick update on MSBA.
Sure. Oh, actually, I have one more thing too.
Okay.
You do that first.
Okay, are you going to do?
But Dave had something he wanted to do first.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'll have to do it second. So I won't go through all of this, but one of this is the
our
the
override.
override update. And if you
Okay.
look on the second page, you can see, again, blue is the new. You can see that in there is the monies for the new English Language Arts program that was approved by the school committee at our last meeting. So out of that 300,000, we are planning to spend $293,939.06. So the balance in that account is $6,061. But we also need some AP textbooks, so that's where some of that other money might be spent. So that's the only significant change since then, but I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
All right.
Now,
I'll go against my general nature and be brief. But bottom line is, based on the information we received from MSBA, the intent that we have is to meet the MSBA deadline of getting a owner's project manager package to them no later than June 17th. That being the case, they will take a vote on July 13th to approve our choice of an owner's project manager, at which point, we'll sign a contract, be off and running, and then the next step, which is a little more complicated, is the process for getting an architect engineer. What we've been doing now is Kathy Connie and I have been working on a draft request for services for the OPM. We expect to get something out to the committee within the next week or two. You shortly be getting a doodle poll requesting certain dates to see when we as a full committee can meet. And that would be to approve the scope of services, approve a subcommittee, and do a few other odds and ends, which MSBA, again, another one of those, golden rule type of organizations, requires us to do. So there'll be a meeting probably the third or fourth week in March. And assuming we get the go-ahead, we'll begin, getting the RFS out to the Central Register, get some responses, shortlist the OPMs. This is, we'll have a 5-person committee do that. And just go through the process of choosing an OPM and be off and running. So that's the next step, very prescriptive process. So Kathy and I and everyone else are being very particular. We do everything according to Hoyle, and that's where we're at.
and this is in regards to, just for the general public
That's
who
the-
doesn't understand the whole thing,
That's
is that this is in regards to the,
the middle school building committee to replace, hopefully, the Coakley Middle School.
thank you. Any questions?
So,
Well, I have to
that's it.
say, thank you very much. You've been very informative, complete, great information. I did a lot to read at night. But thank you, and you did a very good job on that presentation, I have to. And you do a wonderful job too when you're on the school committee and they're asking for information and you've got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Next up, Mr. Mizuko. So I have to apologize to you folks, I never thought that it would take us this long to get through all of this information,
It always does.
but it was good
does.
information and, well, thank you.
Just wait till they actually present the budget, so.
Okay, hold on a second.
Are you gonna take a couple-minute recess, or you wanna just
2
plow right in?
seconds.
Well, I guess
Hey,
we
Dave?
need to.
I found the bathroom. I didn't even know what bathroom in town was. Did you hear about
Can we vote on a,
I think if the
yeah,
chair just calls a 2-minute recess, that's
2-minute recess, please? We back? Okay, thank you. All right, next up would be Ms. Mizuko with the budget overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna go through this in some detail, but if you hold some questions till towards the end, we'll be able to get through a good amount of material. As you know, there's sort of a option 1 and option 2. We had sent out information about a week ago with how the budget looks at a high level. There is a proposal to move a couple of items around. They're sort of up here, it's not the individual line items of the budget. So I'll start with revenue. The revenue projections as here are at 90% of our prior actuals for local receipts. That's obviously gonna be up for some discussion. In terms of overall revenue, it was a fairly positive year. I know we have a lot of challenges in the school budget, but the town does have revenues available this year. We have leftover levy capacity last year as a result of the 10-year decennial revaluation. That would be levy capacity that we'd be raising taxes on, but it's a revenue source that occurs about every 10 years when you have that true up. State aid overall came in fairly well. So from a revenue perspective, we're doing well. A couple of items as we move down the revenue projections. As you know, the utilities should balance out the utilities. The tax levy, 2 items to point out there is, I'll try to zoom in on it. The exclusion there, that if you look at that 1 point, the screen doesn't do that quickly. Can't get the cursor there, but this $1.8 million number right here, that's the high school override, and 1.7 here is the projected. So that small decrease does have a small decrease impact on the average tax bill that folks have. Again, $70,000 or so is not substantial, but that number comes down a little bit each year. There is also, with the budget proposal, about $100,000 of unused levy capacity on the table. That likely will get adjusted, but there's an attempt to leave a little bit of levy capacity untaxed with the budget as presented. The next number I want to draw your attention to is this $625,000 number here. We have the debt service for Forbes Hill projected in the budget because we need to make sure we're projecting for it. It's potentially, we could close on the property before the end of the month, but we have to present a budget that assumes that won't happen because we need to make sure we're raising revenues. That $625,000 is the foreclosed deposit on the property. So the proposed budget includes using that to pay a portion of the debt service on Forbes Hill. The rest of it is included in the regular debt service budget. If that property does not sell until next year year's budget would have the full debt service around $900,000 to $100,000, depending on where the interest rate lies. into the budget. We originally had projected to take out the water receipts fund as a shared receipt, because it should be going to water meter repairs. We weren't able to do that. We originally told the FinCom we'd be able to do that. We're not able to at this time. We still need to keep that revenue programmed in there. There is the risk that that causes a little bit of an offset in free cash and causes us to actually lose free cash. We are trying to continue to separate out the utility funds to make sure there's no cross-subsidization between the enterprise funds and the general fund. I think it works to the general fund's favor with the light department, not so much with the water department, and we need to make sure that our utility customers are paying, those are our ratepayers, but that they're bearing the full cost of the utility and that we're not subsidizing in any way from the general fund, or vice versa, which is less likely to happen. So you'll notice the total estimated revenues of around $206,190,000, up from last year, up from the prior year, et cetera. The increase though is not as substantial as it looks like the 19 to 21 increase, 19 to 20 increase. We're gonna go into the expense budgets in a moment, but what I wanna draw everyone's attention to, again, the bottom line is looking at $206,199,867. It shows a deficit there of $9,000, but that'll be a wash once all the numbers balance out. We are increasing the overlay. There's one other number I'll draw your attention to, a certain amount of money there. We're increasing it about $40,000. We know that we want to have an increase in the senior tax work-off program, and we want to be sure we can absorb potential tax abatement programs that we're looking at for seniors and veterans. We were a little concerned going into the year with an override. Sometimes when people see an increase in their taxes, it triggers an abatement. Our abatement requests haven't been any heavier than normal. They've actually been a little bit lighter. So we always have a fair cushion in the overlay. We've added to it to make sure we can absorb any potential tax abatements as well as increases to the senior tax work-off program. Before I get into the expense budgets, just a quick look at some of our larger funds in relation to the operating budget. Stabilization at $4.9 million with our projected increase in FY21 it's at $5.5 million. The same increase we've been projecting this last several years, giving a balance this coming start of this fiscal year of around $6 million even. The light rate shock fund, only about $4.1 million. As you know, that's our, we sometimes refer to it as the light department stabilization fund. That's probably not an accurate term. It really is a rate shock fund. That's probably a lot lower than it needs to be. It's probably at a fifth of where it should be, but we're muscling through. So depending on how you want to look at it, if our target is to try to have 5% of the total operating budget in a cash fund balance, we're there. How we structure it is questionable whether we're at the 5% we want to be, but we're not in bad shape, I think is the overall message. The right-hand column is the temporary override stabilization fund. The proposal that you have in front of you, and we'll talk about option 2, which changes it a little bit, would add $700,000 into it. The proposal in front of you adds $600,000 to it. Our original projection for balancing a budget over 5 years included a $700,000 allocation in year 1, $350,000 in year 2, $0 in year 3, and then drawing it down at varying amounts for years 4 and 5. So the addition of $600,000 this year, possibly $700,000 depending on which option we go for, is good. That means we're exceeding financial targets, that we have some cushion, that we're doing well in terms of building up that fund. As you can see this year alone, with the school department having over $1 million in unanticipated costs, it looks like we're doing really, really well with the fund, but it can get drained pretty quickly in a difficult budget year. But if we go ahead with the $600,000 addition, we will be at about $1.8 million at the start of the fiscal year. So, moving on to a sheet that will probably become, and I'll see if I can zoom in on this a little bit for everyone, that will become more of a standard budget sheet. This relates to the override. We're calling it our calculation of maximum budget increases per MOU, to try to show how we actually get to the numbers that we base that 3.5% on. This is something that Tom, who incidentally is home ill tonight, so he couldn't be here, so I am pinch hitting for him. We wanted to make sure we could clearly explain to town meeting where we got 3.5% from. We certainly want to make sure we can explain to the Finance Commission or the Board of Selectmen. So I'll start with the school budget, which is a little bit easier to look at before you jump into the general government budget, which is a little bit more complicated. You'll notice right here, we did it on the school general government budget, we subtracted out capital items for 2 reasons. One is we still sort of dump capital projects into the budget, and then to say that we're going to get 3.5% on top of a capital project isn't really an accurate representation of the actual budget, And those numbers were about equal this year between the school and general government, but they changed dramatically year to year. Starting next year, we're no longer gonna be dumping the capital items into the actual operating budget, so neither the general government nor the school budget will have to worry about what their budget was and what the adjustment was based on a capital project. It's created some inequities, it's created some challenges in actually doing a trend analysis and seeing where a budget's going, because it would get dumped into the operating budget. So the DPW budget would all of a sudden go up $1 million a year because we did a project, and then it would look like it came down a year. So we've subtracted out those numbers, and then what we call the budget in munis, you get a total, for the general government of 36,866, and then the school department is 49,190. However, as we're moving towards enterprise fund-like accounting, we are subtracting some of the costs that are somewhat booked to the general government budget for water and sewer, and trying to make sure that our water and sewer fund balances. When we take a loss on water and sewer, it comes out of free cash. If we have a net surplus, which we should, it adds to free cash, but our rates aren't necessarily recovering where we should be recovering them, and we're trying to segregate it out into its own fund so it can stand on its own. If we're taking a loss on water and sewer, and that can happen because it's a particularly wet season, the water sewer fund and the ratepayers need to absorb that cost the same way it would happen with the utility. We can't absorb that cost in the general fund. But what we did is we took the town's FY20 operating budget, we subtracted those costs that are related to the water and sewer operation, so now we're truly getting to a balanced utility cost. And then we based our 3.5% on that reduced number, which is the number here. Again, the idea being that certainly it would be, you couldn't move all these costs out, nor would you base it on the larger number. Those are now part of a separate water and sewer budget. You'll still see some reductions in allocations in the general government budget, but we're trying to make sure we're balancing our utilities. Another area where we run into a challenge is the projections of debt costs, because both water and sewer and electric utilities tend to be heavily capitalized, so when you're heavily indebted, so we're trying to project out our debt. The number we need to know is really what's that debt within the levy and what's counting against the general fund. Water and sewer debt and electric debt are paid by water and sewer rates and electric rates. I sometimes get the question all right, we're spending money on water and sewer, we're spending on electric, will this cause rates to go up? 100% of water and sewer costs are always paid from rates, and 100% of electric is always paid from rates. Sometimes you have that cross-subsidization when we're trying to make sure we're eliminating that, but any water and sewer expense is from rates, any electric expense is from rates. So when you scroll down to right about here, the 3.5% increase for the general government budget comes to 1.235, and for the school department it comes to 1.72. So maximum FY21 budgets of 36 million and 50 million respectively. I'll just scroll up here real quick. As you know, utilities and shared costs are, I don't want to say not subject to the MOU, but utilities have to cover utility costs. The shared costs budgets we'll talk about a little bit more when we get into the budgets. There is a reference to the health insurance budget in the override. We'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about health insurance. So there's two other items that I want to talk about, and this will be where we'll briefly discuss sort of option 1 and 2. There's actually 3 items here that I want to talk about. So one of them is the Student Opportunities Act funding. It's approximately $600,000. We're not counting that as part of the school budget because it is considered a mandate above and beyond what we're allowed to do. They can spend it on some existing costs, so that money's not factored into the school budget in this sense. That would be $600,000 they can spend entirely on the SOA money. We sort of want to keep that separate for a couple of reasons. One, not only does the school department have to come up with a plan for it, but as we go forward, we're going to want to manage that money. If we add services directed to the Student Opportunities Act, we're going to want to be able to tell the state if they ever cut that money back that this is the budget tied to it. If too much of it just gets absorbed in the budget, and then it sort of becomes an accounting challenge down the road where we're saying, well, gee, you know, we added this position over here and it was an SOA position, or was it? It wasn't. So, and the idea is that the money's supposed to be an investment in something different. So as we see these costs rising throughout the school budget, let's try to allocate that money for a actual investment and actual change. I'll skip over the out-of-district number for a moment because that one's a little bit more in flux. There's also a $600,000 number in here for the facilities department. What Paul and I have put together, working with Dave, is a proposal to fund it out of available revenues to do it right in year 1. We know that off the gate we have to do better than we've been doing. We want to invest more in our facilities. So you have a separate budget for that we can discuss when the committee feels is appropriate, to do it right when it comes to actually having a facilities department, to invest in our facilities. I know earlier somebody made the comment that a lot of the special ed challenges we faced for years and we just haven't addressed them. Well, we have revenue this year to start addressing challenges, and our backlog of deferred maintenance in all of our buildings is pretty substantial. So this is the first time we actually have revenues to pour towards starting to address that. And we know we have a middle school coming up, just in brief, we know we have a middle school coming up. It's gonna be some time before we can address the age of the elementary schools in any comprehensive fashion. We have a couple of town buildings that need substantial rehabilitations, which means that everything that's left is gonna go a long, long time before it gets a substantial influx of money. So this in the high school is roughly 20% through its expected lifespan. And I know that sounds crazy when you think, wait a minute, the high school, it's brand new. At 8 years, those buildings are expected to have a 50-year lifespan. If you maintain them well, they can easily go 80 or 100 years. But our brand new high school is almost 20% through its lifespan. So we know we're gonna need to be investing more in our facilities to maintain them and not take a step backwards in terms of looking at our cost containment. And briefly on the facilities before we go over to the out-of-district placement money, the big savings we're gonna see is in a lot of the smaller projects. I mean, the facilities department's not necessarily gonna save us on an $80 million school, but it's all the different small projects we have to get done, repairing bathrooms, replacing kitchens, repairing an office that so much of it gets contracted out. And I'm sure you've all read the memo when we talk about prevailing wage and what we pay, but those are where we're spending a lot of money on just routine maintenance to keep things working where they are. The third number there, the out-of-district additional sped tuitions, the superintendent and I have talked quite a bit in the last few months about the challenges they're facing with really unexpected out-of-district special ed costs. And these are really the high case costs of $200,000 plus costs. Those are costs that you can't really manage differently. You couldn't have some of the lower cost out-of-district placements, you might be able to have an in-house program. These are largely your severely disabled students who we would never be a district large enough to have the sort of programs in there. Some of them are residential students, so it really is, I wouldn't call it a mandate, I mean, it's a mandate, but it's really something that's unanticipated that you can't address any other way. And certainly if I had the same cost in the general government budget or the light budget or the water budget, I'd be making the same case that, look, this is something we can't control and it's a substantial amount of dollars. So the budget as proposed has it with that number at $800,000. I was happy to call Dave and tell him I thought we had that amount of money, and he said that's great, but it actually probably needs to be a little bit more. So I did some digging over the weekend, and I talked to Dave late Friday night, throughout Saturday, and even we talked on Sunday. So we've been going back and forth on this. The option 2 proposal that you have in front of you, and I have extra copies here, would actually increase that number to $1.4 million, covering a lot of those costs. I'm sure we'll want to have discussion on that.
Are those mostly the costs that you were presenting in your presentation here earlier? The additional FTEs for SPED as well as the out-of-district?
Well, the majority of it is out-of-district.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to jump into before we
Tony,
have,
where would we get that money from?
so if you give me 2 minutes, we can discuss that now, or I can go through a couple other items, and then we can.
As long as
wrap
you
up.
come back to it.
Yep. So I'm gonna cover a couple of the shared cost budgets really quickly because it relates to that question. And we can always come back to those for further details, but give me just a moment to scroll here. All right, so in brief, you'll notice we have our debt service number there with the projected increase, 18.7 to 19.1. This is page 19. One other item I want to point out is Blue Hills, as we run through these, increase of $285,000. Do you have folks on page 19?
Yep.
So I just covered debt service, which is right here.
Which one is, look at Blue Hills. $285,000 is the change.
Well, we can take a minute for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we scroll through some of these shared costs, Norfolk Aggie up percentage-wise high, but it's just an increase of about 4 students. Blue Hills Regional is a result of the impact of their debt service for their construction project, as well as an addition of students to it, up $285,000. So that's
We went up something like 14 kids or some number just like that.
correct. And their debt
Very
service
large number.
is starting to hit. So that's a challenge. So that's dollars directly out of the budget. Obviously, it's a different educational opportunity, but $285,000 is certainly a substantial hit. The pension number, which is what I want to talk about next, is not a substantial increase. We are moving, as we move towards making sure that light water expenses aren't booked in the general government budget, and or I should say in the shared budget, and they're not impacting the levy limit. We're moving those costs over to be booked directly in the light department. And once we get the debt service number, I'll be able to sleep better at night, but we're moving them over cautiously to make sure that we're not causing a shock to rates as we do it. We were able to absorb last year's increases. We didn't have a rate increase. Recent economic challenges aside, we think we should be able to do it this year without any substantial increases. And what we did this year was move the pension fund cost over. So it was about $520,000. You don't see it reflected in here yet. The initial proposal was that because that frees up money in the shared cost budget, that we would do a catch-up on the pension fund, that we would be contributing more than our actuarially required amount, so that we can start to hopefully beat our 2029 estimate of being fully funded, or get to our fully funded plus area level prior to that or shortly thereafter. That way we're not delaying again. Every pension fund in the state was supposed to be fully funded 25 years ago, and the numbers always get pushed out, and they always get pushed out, they always get pushed out. We made, Judy would know, was it 10 or 15 years ago, we made fairly large catch-up to the pension fund. It's one of the reasons we're in the low 80s in terms of funding. We're not in the Norfolk County system, they're in the low 50s, and I hear from my colleagues all the time, they can't stand that their costs are going through the roof and their fund is not doing well. We're doing well. We want to put more money into it. Once we are fully funded plus on the pension system, we can then move that cost over to begin addressing OPEB comprehensively. The budget as presented, sort of option one, has the entire amount of that going into it. Option two is we would actually put about $250,000 extra, and then the other $250,000 savings would go towards the out-of-district replacement cost. So that's one piece of finding that additional funding. As we scroll through, workers' comp, no substantial changes in the budget there. We're trying to keep that flat. Again, it is one of those budgets that I wouldn't say it's uncontrollable, but you never know when you're gonna have a claim, you never know when you're gonna have a high cost claim. I know the screen's screwing up a little bit there. What we've done for group insurance, which is our health insurance number, is we've projected a 5% increase. Now, the numbers have come back, we haven't gotten the final numbers from the GIC. It's generally slightly under 5%, but the challenge is, they'll say that the rate increase across the board is 4.8%, but it varies by plan. So some plans are 0, some plans are 3, some plans are 7. So we have to take that and plug that in. Once we get final numbers, there's a potential that the number could drop a little bit. It may average out to be maybe 4.7 or 4.6. However, we added quite a few positions last year to the school department as a result of the override, and we know that there's more plans being contributed this year. You never actually know what that number is, and it's actually always changing throughout the year. So if our final true-up of the health insurance comes in at 4.6 or 4.7, my recommendation is we stay with the 5 to continue to give ourselves a buffer. You always need a buffer in there, and when we have a good year, we know we transfer a couple $100,000 into OPEB at the end of the year. If we really cut down that number, that reduces an OPEB transfer, and we do lose the flexibility that we need to have in there. Medicare is up just with the cost of projected payroll increases. Insurance costs, there's some movement in that budget. We did do a big increase to that budget last year. We moved the money we've been looking at for cash capital into there. We think we need to probably keep that money in there. We are seeing some increases in our insurance and our unemployment claims. We've gone a while without unemployment being an issue. It's somewhat creeping up, and we've had to move the numbers around in there. So that 961 looks like it's flat, but remember last year that number was a lot less. So yes, it's flat, but it got a big bump last year that we were hoping would be temporarily a bump, but we think we need to continue to absorb that in the insurance budget. Our liability costs are going up, consistent with any other business and consultant with the market. We haven't had any huge losses lately, but we've had a couple of different claims that are against insurance. It's a never-changing item. The reserve fund at $150,000. I'm not sure why that's. Is it normally at 125? Or
Normally at 125, but I think we have a policy guideline of 150.
Okay, so we've been able to achieve that. Override stabilization, you'll see in this proposal, is at $600,000. Option 2, as we're calling it, would bring it to $700,000. Facilities, there's a facilities cost of $600,000. We'll come back to how we're getting to option 2 in a moment, the facilities budget. I won't get into detail on the light or broadband budgets at this point. When we have those department heads here, we'll cover them as well as water and sewer. So And this is just the local receipts, if anyone wants to review the local receipts, I may have lost some connectivity up there. So getting back to the option 1 and 2, so we can talk about many different budget proposals possible.
Tony, have a copy?
Yes. Pass those out, there's more if anyone.
Thank you.
Here's the.
Give that one to me. It's actually on the system, but
I think, there's one more.
how many pages have we got here? Just one?
Yeah, I got more.
Okay, here you go. Wait, oh, I have that on here. He's got another, he's got a, what else?
Does everyone have this piece of paper? Alright. So, to try to simplify in everyone's minds, the budget that you're sent here is option 1. Option 2 would increase projected local receipts to 92%. So currently we're showing 90%, which is our budget. That would generate about $300,000 in revenue. We're still making progress towards our fiscal target and our financial policies, but we're not, we haven't made as much progress as we would if we were at the 90%. We would reduce the pension catch-up number from $500,000, and it's a slightly, I think it's $521,000. But we would reduce that from $500,000 to $250,000. That would free up $250,000 in available funds. I'll come back to removing the facility salaries in a minute because we gotta have a discussion on that. And then this is actually a decrease of that number, but if we're gonna move some money around with increased receipt projections, I'd like to increase the override stabilization fund to $700,000, so that's why it shows on the sheet an actual decrease. But removing the facility salaries from the school budget to the out-of-district placement fund, what we're putting forward is a facilities department that has some new positions and some moved positions from the school department. There's been some discussion about, originally as envisioned, those positions would be staying in the school budget for the first year. The challenge with that, and it's not really a challenge, is that the positions that are being created, if you will, or that are being changed, are school employees who are gonna move into those positions. So you could move them over to here and then backfill those positions if you wanted, but you'd be putting new people into them one way or another. So the question becomes, what do you do with that revenue? So an example will be the facilities director. So that's budgeted in the facilities budget now, his full salary cost. So you move him over and you say, well, you keep the facilities director budget over here. I guess you could not do that and you'd have another $100,000 somewhere else, but we at some point need to create the facilities budget. So you're moving 3 of those positions over to the facilities department. That frees up 3 salaries. There's a couple of things you can do with that. The original proposal was leave them in there and the schools could just absorb it somewhere else just as a budget cut. Not everyone seemed thrilled with that idea. Option 2, the Tony option originally, not this option 2, but option B we'll call it, not to confuse anymore, was, well then let's add it towards small capital projects because God knows we have millions of dollars of deferred maintenance. In an effort to get the out-of-district placement number up, option 2, option C, is that money would be taken out of the regular school budget and placed into this out-of-district placement line. That gets us to $1.48 million. I don't think that going much beyond that is really feasible without starting to take a step backwards. You're gonna have to have a discussion as well as budget balancing and the selectmen about how does this relate to the 3.5%? Are we getting around it? Are we just ignoring it? 2 things to keep in mind. 1, I'm just putting forward a proposal to solve a problem, because there's always a solution out there. 2 is when you have available revenues, I know we don't wanna spend them, we don't wanna tax more than we have to, but when you have a solution, you should always look at the solution. And then 3, we don't wanna move backwards. We certainly don't wanna go to the community and say, well, we raised your taxes a lot last year, this year was kind of a tough budget, so we're just gonna say screw it, because your taxes are still gonna be where they are, and we're just gonna make some cuts, or not that we necessarily have to make some cuts, but we don't wanna move backwards. So always keep that in mind that, is this ideal, is this exactly what we'd like to see? No, but this might be making sure we're at least not moving backwards. And to some extent, you could make an argument, maybe we're just treading water, but from a financial standpoint, we are doing well. And I want everyone to understand that we may not be getting everything we want, but this is not a bad budget year in that sense. We've had some particular hits to the school budget, but money for facilities, keeping that SOA money separate, and money for addressing the substantial change in out-of-district placement costs, what that means is we're actually investing in solving problems. If we hadn't had a 3.5% cap, what you would have seen is a general government budget going up 6% and a school budget going up 11%. And that's good, that's easy, we all like that, we like to say let's put this money out here and spend it on things, but it would have prevented us from investing. So the benefit benefit to that 3.5%, even if you could make an argument that you're exceeding it by doing this or that, is it's forcing us to invest money in areas and justify where we're spending it than just saying, we need a little bit more here or there. So that 3.5% and that looking at that override has allowed us to make sure that we have some revenues available to invest. Now, you could easily make the argument that, well, just leave them on the table and leave it untaxed, and there's some validity to that argument, but it's a chance to invest. I had to cut about $180,000 out of the general government budget to live within my 3.5% cap, and that was so I could make sure I could afford an Article 1 to make sure we can cover contractual obligations. So it's not without some cost. However, it's forcing us to invest, which is a good thing. We will finally have, if everyone goes forward with it, an actual real facilities department for the town. We will have addressed some substantial out-of-district costs. It's not everything they want, it's not the $4 or $5 million, but it's probably the biggest step in that direction we've made in a decade. And within the context of the budget and water and sewer rates, we're also looking, real quick on the capital plan, we're looking at about $2.6 million in free cash on capital. So we're limiting borrowing to just the fire ambulance and some of the larger construction projects. So we're finally paying cash for these smaller items. Even though it's cheap to borrow right now, it's still tough to pay interest on a $50,000 vehicle when we know we can pay the cash. That's a good thing. I'm separately proposing to capital outlay later this month to do a 5-year road borrowing and a 5-year water infrastructure project. Those are gonna be some substantial borrowing projects. It's gonna, it'll be within the levy limit for the road work, it'll impact the water rates, but we're in a position where interest rates are low and there's some general flexibility in the budget that we can now actually look at investing in our infrastructure. Not just trying to patch what we've always had, but actually trying to make a little bit of progress. Somebody earlier had said, we went so long without addressing some of these special ed problems, and they're right. We need to take the same look at our infrastructure because we don't want to hit that tipping point where you can't fix the problem. Because once you can't fix the problem, you can't go back. And we probably came very close with some of these special ed costs and very close with the school department. I think if you look at the context of the override, we came right up to that tipping point. It was which direction does the community go? And we didn't tip over into sort of permanent decline. So we have some challenges this year, but overall from a revenue standpoint, it's pretty good. From an expense standpoint, where we're spending new monies, it's for investments that we can tie to, it's something new that we're doing for the community that is an investment in our future.
Tony, can I ask a question?
Yep.
Could I propose an option D that's a combination of the two?
Sure.
So, we wanna fund the out-of-state placements, we need the 1.4 million. I do agree that the facilities budget should move out of the school fund because those salaries no longer belong to the school. I would put them up with option 1, so that would decrease what we need to ask for increased tax levy by $230,000. Right? Because those salaries should move anyway, irregardless.
Correct, and that would decrease the overall,
Impact to 1.1 something million.
correct, the schools department would have about 1.25 million.
So that's what I would recommend, because those should be moved out, and if we use them to cover the existing cost, I totally agree with that, but that will decrease the amount of the levy increase that we need to impact. I don't know how everyone feels
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, it's certainly a point of discussion.
So I'm saying this should happen irregardless. I'm saying to take this 230,000,
Yeah.
move it up to option 1, so it actually decreases the increase in the budget by 230K, so instead of 1.4, we're looking at 1.17 million.
Well, in the
That's
end-
part of one of the 1.4.
No, it's not, but the option 1 is they keep that money in their regular budget.
I think it's something, something to look at. In the end, I'm not sure whether it makes that much difference,
You should
because
move that to
if you
the-
take that money out
To the
and put it
OED.
up into option 1, then you're still gonna be a certain amount of money short
You
in the
haven't
facilities
seen what's in
budget.
proposal.
Well, what I would do is, if
So
you're,
I think it evens out, I think, in the end. I
what I
don't
would do
know.
to make that happen easier is just delete that item from option 2 and go with option 2 if that's what you wanna go with. The school department gets 1.25 million in that case. You can move it up to option 1, which would leave levy capacity on the table and give the schools 800,000. Your goal is to give them more, because my understanding from Dave is that 800 is close, but it's not covering all. I would just delete it out of option 2 and the school department will get 1.25 million.
Because then they keep the 230 anyway, so it's 6 of one, half dozen of another.
Yeah, the money evens out, it's just a matter of, it's not gonna really affect the levy capacity at all.
Well, in the first one, the school department's getting this money plus the additional 230,000. That $230,000 is just being absorbed in their budget, and then Tony's taking another $230,000 and putting in the facilities budget. So in option one, they're getting the 1.48 million, plus they're getting to
No,
keep
no,
that 230,000.
No.
Option one, they're only
No.
getting $800,000.
Can I see that?
Right, but that $230,000 isn't taken out of the school's budget in option one.
Correct, it's left in the school budget.
Right.
Well, there's debate about whether how folks wanna go forward with that, but correct, so the easier way to do this is start with your end goal, start with the number you wanna provide for the school department, and then you work it back from there. And that's an easier way to make sure we're arriving at the number and playing with the numbers.
So I think it's 1.4 million, but if they already have 230,000 of salaries that aren't gonna be in the school budget anymore, it's not 1.4 million we need to give them, it's 1.17 million.
Right.
I don't.
They have that
I-
$230,000 in their budget today, and you're saying you're not gonna, in option one, it doesn't move. So actually, they're getting one.
The original option one was actually to put that money, this was based on our meeting we had last Friday night, that money would have gotten moved out of the school department budget to the facilities department.
Fair.
Could I ask for a clarification here? Option two, there's 4 pieces, and it adds up to $780,000 when you do the pluses and the minuses?
Yep.
Yeah.
680,000.
So then,
680, take out the
well,
100,000.
there's a minus 100. Okay, that's 680, and that 680 on top of the 800 makes it 1.480,
Yes,
which is what you had in your option two proposal.
correct,
So that's where you're funding that additional amount of money.
correct.
Got it.
Yeah, option two really is an add-on to option one.
But in option one, this money isn't going to the schools, it's going to the facilities department.
No, it's not, it's
No,
going.
the
No.
facilities
No, it's
department's
not.
funded out of new revenue.
No, it's going to
in both
here.
So what I need someone to explain, because this is, it seems to me that this is going around in circles. So someone explain this to me like I'm a toddler, please, because I am a toddler. So we have $230,000 of salaries for 3 people that are currently in the school department. We are picking up those people and we're putting them down into the facilities department. And their salaries are gonna be budgeted out of a separate line item. That $230,000 is still in the school budget, even though they're not paying those
We're gonna
salaries.
move it
As
to
of
the
Friday
outer
night.
Hold on,
Wait,
hold
wait,
on, let Tony explain it.
Remember, but was everyone here at the Friday, meeting we had last Friday night?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you remember, I said originally, I'd like to leave them in the school budget.
right.
And the FinCom said, nope, they should come out of the school budget.
Right.
So they went out of the school budget.
So in option one, that $230,000 comes out of the school budget and goes into the shared facilities budget, correct?
No,
Hold
I think it's
on.
still in there.
Then what you're saying isn't making sense to me, because there's $230,000 physically in Dave's budget, right, in Dr. Thompson's budget right now, and it pays for those 3 people. You're taking those 3 people and moving them.
That
There's
might-
still $230,000 in his budget. What is happening to that money?
Going to the, going.
Hold on,
to-
No,
let Tony
so
explain
that
this.
money, in option one, it stays in the budget, but I'm not sure what you're,
So it stays in the the school department's budget.
Right, and
It should be taken out, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Still pay those people and he pays the difference.
Okay, so my point is that money should be taken out because those people
Okay.
are now in a completely different department. And that $230,000 should go with the people, it should bounce with the people. And therefore, what we need to give the schools isn't 1.4 million, because they have
1.2.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
They have $230,000 already in their budget. So they really only need 1.17 million, 1.4 minus the 230. They don't need the full 1.4, that's what I'm
It-
trying to say.
When you look at the numbers, it really doesn't,
That's what this
the bottom line doesn't change, okay? Whether you wanna put the money in this side of the bucket or another side of the bucket, it really
1 point.
doesn't matter. You know, the bottom line, it's a difficult concept to explain, but the bottom line stays the same. Is that correct, Tony?
at the end of the day, yeah.
Right.
The total expense budget for the town isn't changing.
Right.
No, but it's less of an increase that the school has to ask for to meet these special placements. And it looks like less of an increase, like less of a violation of that 3.5% in the MOA, because the school department is the one
No,
asking for all the
no,
extra.
But that has
because
nothing to do
that
with-
money would be taken right off the top of their budget. So when you calculate out their budget, which was, what was it, Dave? It was something like 47 million, you know, in FY '20. you calculate out the 3.5% by taking, I'm using the number 47 million, you take out $230,000, and then you'd multiply it by 3.5%, and that's your budget, okay? But I mean,
Yes.
you know, again, we're just playing money games right here, because the bottom line doesn't change.
Tony
Yes.
and Dr. Thompson, instead of getting 1.480 with this proposal that you'll only be getting 1.250.
And the positions still go over to, you know,
Facilities.
Facilities.
And it's funded by the 600,000.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from, Tony?
Available revenues.
Available with, okay?
It's really, the goal of the 1.48 was as close as I could get to the 1.5 Dave wanted, to get it up there. I mean, if you wanna leave levy capacity on the table, we can always, I mean, you can delete whatever we want to leave levy capacity on the table, but the starting point is how can we solve that problem and get as close to that number as possible.
I'm just saying, we spent a whole 2 hours talking to the school committee, grilling them on questions about them increasing their budget. I know $230,000 isn't a ton of money, but if there's $230,000 on the table that's not gonna be used for salaries of the school department anymore, why would we just give that money to the schools when we just spent 2 hours arguing why we
I don't
shouldn't?
disagree with you, but this is Tony's plan, to get Dave to the 1.48, which you
Right.
think you need.
And just to be fair, the school committee's not had a chance to discuss any of this.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
in the end, it doesn't matter to the school committee, you know, whether you put this 230 in one bucket or another bucket. The bottom line is to make sure the school committee budget is whole, whatever that number is. I mean, I think we're just sort of spinning our wheels talking about, well, what bucket should this $230,000 be? It doesn't make any difference, period.
Well, it does make a difference if we're only gonna give the superintendent 1.250. And we take the other 230 and put it into the facilities.
I mean, the point is that we wanted to have these two items as separate line items, you know, for various reasons, and take the 230 out of the school budget, put it directly into the facilities budget. It doesn't impact, you know, the level of services a school provides, because the positions go with the salaries. Again, I just think that we're making a mountain out of a molehill here. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay. Yeah.
Dave.
Dave,
If I can, you're both right, but I think all Kelly is trying to do is to account for those dollars
that's right.
by where the positions end up,
Yep.
not to shortchange anybody.
Yeah.
Because you're right, at the end of the day, everybody needs what they need, we have to be to it.
Yep.
But just for accounting purposes, you wanna say that if the facilities department is gonna pay these people out of their budget, that money needs to end up with them.
Yep.
So that we do it. The
Yeah.
other thing is, cause you can have a bigger issue next year when you have to move the actual salaries of the
Custodians and, right.
and the repair dollars. So if you wanna follow that same process, at least you set it up as saying, hey, we did this way, this is how we can do it. The third thing is the 600,000. I agree that you want to track that separately, but as far as an increase to the budget, you're really only adding the 300,000 or 400,000
That's
that
right.
Dave's gonna add in, so you have to somehow figure out how you're gonna account for that. It's not a full 600,000, although you're tracking it separately as a $600,000 item, it's not a new 600.
Right.
So that was my only comment.
Well, if it's not new, it doesn't need to be funded upfront at 600,000.
It's whatever Dave's team works out to what that number, out of the
Correct.
600, this is
Yeah.
what I need new.
The existing
You
should
can
stay in
still
the
track
existing
it
budget.
That's
as
right.
600, but you're only adding, you know,
Got
something
it.
less to the budget.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Ms. Mizuka?
I think that is all I have, unless you wanna go through some of the smaller, general government budgets.
We can do that during the hearings,
Okay.
I think.
What is the wish of the board here, folks?
What was that?
What would you like to do here? Do you want to hear more?
Do we wanna make a motion to, table that?
for when the budget hearings happen?
Which one are we
For
on?
additional
These,
questions?
the information that Tony just gave us will be brought up again, am I correct, sir, with the budget balancing
Wednesday,
Yeah.
on Wednesday?
Yeah.
Okay,
Why
so
don't we
we'll
do
just
that?
leave it as it is, and if it doesn't require a vote
Okay.
on our part. Is that comfortable for
fine.
everybody?
Works for me.
Okay, thank you. And the general manager's budget is, what were you planning on there? Do you have
we
budgets
just-
to present?
Well, we had discussed whether or not we wanted to start with some of the smaller
Yeah,
offices. I mean, we can cover the manager's office, the selectman's office, we've covered some of the shared costs, so if you'd like to, we can go right into that.
What is the feeling of the board here? Do you wanna cover a few small things, or you wanna move
Why
on?
don't we,
Rather
I think move on.
I think
we
mean,
should
it's-
move
It
on.
looks like for those particular items, you know,
They're
they're falling
quick.
with the 3.5 max cap, so
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
The whole
that
general
there's-
government budget
Right.
does, the thought was if we just scratch some of the smaller ones off and we have some of the larger departments here would free up time. We always create these schedules every year where we give each department 5 minutes and it never actually works, but it's whatever the
Yeah.
will of the commission is.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you very much.
Just want to do the minutes.
I think that, I wanna do the minutes, and I have some things to give out to you folks. That has come into me as chair, so let's do the minutes. I do have, a question on the minute.
Do you want to move for it first? Move
Pardon me?
for approval, then discuss?
That's how you do it.
Okay,
You
yeah,
move
I'm
for
sorry,
approval,
getting late.
then second, and then discuss.
All right,
Anybody?
Make
I
a
move
Make a
for
motion.
approval.
second.
Okay. Anyone on the minutes?
no,
Besides myself?
no, Ms. Chair,
Okay,
Madam Chair.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth paragraph down, when we were talking about the operating costs and everything, and one thing that I didn't find in here, and maybe I missed it, but we decided to use, I thought it was important, we decided to use the numbers from the DLS website.
Correct.
So, do you believe, like I do, that some wording needs to be put in here?
What the wording would be to use the
Decided
comparisons
to
with
use
the
the
DSL
numbers found on the
Use-
DLS website
use-
from the census
Right.
and adjusted,
Sounds good.
and
Yep.
adjusted according to the DLS.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm losing my voice. Thank you.
Maybe if Anne's losing her voice, we should continue the meeting. What do you think?
Okay, fine, thank you, everybody.
Is there a specific statement we want to draft now, or how do you want to handle just the additional information going to Tom?
Okay,
Well, Molly's there.
Yeah. Do you have enough information to craft a statement?
I will craft what I have and send it to Anne for
Okay,
further
thank
review.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, the next thing is I have some information for you. We received, some notes from Molly Keene, who is our, HR manager.
Thank you.
And I wanted to make sure that everybody got one.
Thank you.
Now, we need to, I am looking at this in two different ways, and I'm not sure which would be the best way to handle this. First of all, maybe Tony, you could answer this question is, when are these promotions,
Salary
salary
changes.
increases going to
Reclassifications.
happen?
Do you have one?
The
They're all
effective
different
date?
depending on-
Pardon me?
What's that?
Do you have an effective date for these?
I'll have to check, I mean, they're all different, a couple of things here, the recreation ones I think are sooner rather than later. There's one or two, because there's something in the personnel policies about if it's over a certain amount, it waits until the next fiscal year. So we would have to double check on that. Some of these won't be in effect until somebody currently retires and there's a new position. That is one of the rec positions. So it's all different depending on what the position is.
Can I ask one question on those? So for the regrades, I get that it's a classification based on market value or whatever that is. If someone's like a 10-4 and the position's reclassed as 11, do they then go to an 11-4? Do they keep that same seniority, or do they start at the beginning of the, you know what I mean?
Not necessarily. You're supposed to start at, I believe it's $1 more than what you're making, but sometimes what we have to look at is you have a weird situation where depending on the way it's based, let's say I go up a grade, and it's like, all right, I'm gonna go to the next available place here to make $1 more. But if I stayed in this grade, I'd actually be making more here in 6 months in weight. So, but it's never it's generally not a free-for-all where it's like, wow, I'm a grade 10, step 4, I wanna be a grade 11, step 9. It usually doesn't work that way. You do have a challenge where somebody who, let's say, is a grade 7 can make a legitimate argument that, wait a minute, I'm here because I have this many years of experience. I've now moved up to a different grade because we've revalued the grade, therefore shouldn't I be there? But we follow generally what the personnel policy is, except when you're changing a position, it can be a little different. I'm more of a fan of changing a position for 2 reasons. When you look at a job and you say, all right, look, at the job description's changed, but you still have the same title. So you have admin assistant and it's a grade 5, and then now it's an admin assistant grade 6. And a couple years later, it's, well, my duties have changed, it's not a market, this thing. Well, now I'm an admin assistant grade 7. I would rather keep it a grade 5, create a new position for grade 7, and then we retain the flexibility in the future of where we put somebody, rather than just bumping up the same positions. Because what it does is you start to lose your bottom grades. And most towns are like this. Your general grades 1 through 4 in a lot of cases, you have no positions in. The last time I worked in our grade 1 out of 20 was like below minimum wage. It's like, well, nobody's a grade 1, you would never be grade 1.
Okay, no, that makes sense, thank you.
Okay, so Tony, when will we hear from these folks? Usually they come in and talk to us, either as the personnel board, or we can do it within the discussions of the budgets of these particular accounts.
So if I hear from these folks, if you mean the folks who have seen a regrade, I mean, it can always come up in the budget, but you want to be cognizant of what the personnel board's responsibility is, and they're there to determine that this is what a salary is. Obviously, if it's a giant change, you can have that discussion with your department, but that's a separate body that's made that decision, and we have to sort of absorb that cost and make it work within the contract.
I don't believe that's the way it's written in the personnel policies.
I have no
I-
comment
Go
on
ahead.
I
this.
would,
Well,
go ahead.
the way it is the personnel board is not a budgetary authority. Only the finance commission is after a presentation by the department head or Tony. So while they can recommend and they're supposed to supply an analysis that says it's gonna cost this amount of dollars beginning in fiscal year 21, it has to get approved by you folks and eventually town meeting. Personnel board has no budgetary authority at all.
Yeah, we never.
They can only make the decision that
They make a
believe-
recommendation.
Well, we make a
They're
the
making a
personnel board makes a
recommendation based on their
recommendation.
analysis of the job, using the policies and
Yeah.
the reclassification plans at hand. So I
So-
agree,
Okay.
there's no utility to having them here.
Right.
It's a budget
So
increase.
it should be by the, brought forward by the department.
Yes, and they'll sit here and say they've gone through the analysis of the personnel board, and the personnel board has
Yeah,
approved it.
but it
As long as
also
their
is,
overall
but
budget
it,
doesn't
but
increase,
it's,
it's not
If they're
it's not an
I guess
issue,
the
right?
question would be,
But
if the
there is a
reclassifications
difference.
are falling into 3.5% max,
Right.
is there an issue? It has to.
They have
Right.
to. I mean, so somebody can get reclassed and get a giant raise. It doesn't matter. The 3.5% is the 3.5%. So I know I had discussions with one department on where somebody would fall on a step scale, and you want them higher, fine. I just need $2,000 from somewhere else. So it's, you know, going through a department and changing grades looks great, but it just reduces the available revenue that's available overall.
And these aren't retro, are they?
well,
Rarely.
They could
yeah,
be.
could be.
Yes, they could.
Yes,
possible.
they could be.
Potentially.
That's
For
what
the
we-
year or for several years?
It's never
No.
several years.
Okay, it would be just be for
Please.
this budget year, potentially.
Is it usually
And they-
retro for the day they filed the
Well, this-
the
like
change?
Andy's, usually the personnel board should have established
An effective date?
For remember this would take place, but by the time it gets approved by whomever, you have to go back to that date to pay them.
Right.
But there is an effective date that it should be mentioned in the letter.
And it's not automatically to the start of the year for any reason. And remember that there's sometimes a difference between I'm a grade 5 and I've been reclassed to a grade 6 to we're considering it a different position. It may only be a grade up, but you're changing the title and the job description. And while you're really being promoted into a different position, it's still budgeted. So then it's not gonna go back beyond when the decision was made.
Okay.
It's not, oh, okay, great, you know, I've been an assistant for 5 years and we've decided I'm really an analyst, so now I'm an analyst. Well, I want my raise going back 6 months. Well, the last 6 months you weren't an analyst. You're an analyst from here going forward.
So, what it boils down to is that we need to have a discussion with the department heads because there is going to be a change in the amount of money they need.
I think
So-
that's appropriate. I mean, you could have Travis here during his public, during his
So
budget hearing, talking about.
my point
how you're gonna
is
incorporate
that
it.
we either do it during the budget hearings, or if, which is fine with me, but you have to understand that it's gonna have to be, on a couple of these things, it's going to have to be on 2 levels. One is the effect of it on the upcoming budget year, and the effect on this present budget year, and we have to know where the funds are coming from.
But the effect
we always-
on next year's budget, fiscal '21, will be,
It's protected under the 3.5%.
right,
Yes,
so there's
But
no issue.
that's
But
fine.
I assume that Tony will be filing a warrant article for funding of this fiscal year '20, correct?
Well, we always have money moves that we make at the special town meeting to make sure that the budget balances.
So
Well,
you
that's
think
what
you
we're
can
telling
fund it by making moves, maybe under the municipal,
If not municipal relief, there would just be transfers at the special in the spring, just like
Oh,
we do
transfer
for
at
any of
the-
our expenses.
so there'd be no
So we
exist-
want to know the impact of this year's budget.
Yeah, and
Be none.
when we have that information available, we'll present it to everyone. We usually prepare it all as we get ready for the special in April, and we make our financial moves. And at the end of the year, sometimes you do municipal relief transfer, you have some unanticipated expenses.
But before the fact that we are having the special, these folks are supposedly getting paid at a rate. How are you gonna do this without, what has happened in the past is we bring it forward as soon as we possibly can, so that the impact to the budget is known by what is happening. So you also have to transfer that money, but if you are paying these people at a certain rate, and you haven't transferred the money, it doesn't work right. Am I
does.
correct?
You don't run out of money until the end of the year. That's why you transfer it later in the year when you're a little bit more certain.
Disagree with Bob.
I actually think the way it would work for Tony's sake, if I'm remembering it correctly, is if his salary line item can absorb
absorb it.
whatever amount he needs.
Right.
It's not an issue.
Can your
It's not
salary-
gonna-
can
it's
your
not gonna come
salary
for
line-
anybody 'cause
Right.
he's absorbing it. If he has to request money go from one line item to the salary line item to cover what he needs, then that's
he's
the
town
action
meeting.
you have to, you make either reserve fund transfer or goes to
That's right.
So-
town meeting.
Can you make these?
We'll have to take a look at it. The challenge is the earlier in the year, your salary line looks great.
Yeah,
So you ask
I
me in
know.
January, oh yeah, man, I can absorb anything, and then as things start to happen, people retire, people
We
leave,
understand that.
and then as it gets closer, that's when you start to say, uh-oh, you know, I might need X or Y dollars.
But
So
that's when
that's-
you would go back to the existing budget and find money already,
Right, that's
so
what we
it's
try
not
to do with
new
our,
money.
with our transfers. So, okay, you know, I had a position vacant in the building inspector's office for 5 weeks, so all right, I need $5,000 to go from here, to go from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's absolved by the budget, I don't think we need to care. That would be like saying we have a decision in every personnel decision you make, that you hire someone and we have to approve that money because it's additional money out. If it fits in your budget, I would think that the budget owners could manage that.
It has to be in their salary line.
Cool, yeah, cool.
It can't be in their budget.
Yeah, absolutely,
It
in their
has to be
salary
in their
budget line, and
salary.
if it's in that budget line, I think that's up to their discretion to manage. If it goes,
You need to do some reading on the personnel board and their policies. Okay. But my point is that you need to have the money in the salary line, and I want to know if you do.
As we
Okay?
get closer towards the end of the year, we'll be able to get you a good analysis.
If this is retroactive in any way, we need to know sooner rather than later. Okay, so let's see, personnel board. Who else, trails? The CPA needs to be fit into our budget discussions. I'll talk to Tom Quaid and
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah.
those folks and Molly to get them in on the dates. Let's see. Anything else? Does anybody have anything that they would like to put on out here?
Just would want to mention, I did send an email out to the superintendent and the business manager of Blue Hills, two new individuals now, inviting them to our meeting on the 26th, March 26th, to review the Blue Hills assessment.
Okay, great.
You mean one of the highlights of their new position, right?
I wish they'd bring cookies, baked by the kids. That would be nice.
And,
But- What?
no, never mind.
Okay. Anything else? See.
Oh, and I scheduled them for, I asked them for a 6 o'clock
Okay.
timing. Just, I figured might as well get them
Get
here
them in and
before
out.
the school, because the school will be more extensive.
Six. Okay. Alrighty. Are we done? We'll postpone a few things that were on our agenda.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
I wasn't even gonna ask that. I thought.